Hi, I'm Royce Freeman, and welcome to TTFT. And I'm here with Michael Slipcase Felcher of Red Shirt Pictures. How are you doing this evening, sir?
Doing just fine. Thanks for having me on.
Looking at your resume, it spawns like decades it seems, and
Oh
you've
God, now I feel horribly old. Spawns decades, I tell you. I remember you working back in '06, and oh, yeah.
So being a collector of physical media myself, it is very. It's amazing to look at the body of work you have, sir. What are your thoughts of before we go in the Wayback Machine to how you got it started? What are your thoughts of the state of physical media today, and how much longer we can keep that old dog running?
The death of physical media has been predicted. I swear, every single year I've been in the business. It's just, and I swear, there's an article that floats around every year that someone just slaps a couple of new lines on and puts their name on. I swear it's the same article that gets passed around. Is physical media dead? Is this the last year for physical media? The marketplace is changing. It is certainly shrinking in some ways. I mean, we're past the heyday of DVD, certainly. And Ultra HD is a smaller market than Blu-ray, which is a smaller market than DVDs and so forth. Streaming has taken a big bite out of things, but at the same time, there's always going to be a market for physical media, and in a weird way, I think it's going to kind of shrink back to what it was during the Laserdisc days, where there's a very devoted, very passionate group of people who will always buy physical media, and no matter really what the prices are, that's going to be kind of a secondary issue. But I don't think it's going anywhere. I really don't. And it's funny with a lot of these streaming services having things up and then just taking them away arbitrarily, and sometimes you thought, oh, I thought the thing I loved was here and now it's gone. There are people who are starting to go, well, streaming's fine for certain things, but the movies I really love and the movies I really want to treasure and go back and forth often, and try to revisit. I want it on my shelf. I want something that I can grab and not know that it's not going to be just arbitrarily taken away from me. So I don't think it's going anywhere. There is no death of physical media on the horizon, but the market will continue to sort of condense down and kind of become more concentrated in a way. And but I don't think that's necessary. I mean, there's labels out there that are doing absolutely great. They're having some of the best years they've ever had. So it's really just a matter of perspective. But will it ever be what it was when, like, during the height of DVD? No, those days have come and gone. But that's okay. That's video format years are like dog years. Things pass by very, very fast. It's hard to believe that when I was a kid, VHS was brand new, and now you show a VHS to someone born in the last 20 years, they're like, what the hell is that? They don't know they don't even recognize what that is. So, I've seen VHS, Beta, CED, Laserdisc, DVD, HD DVD, Blu-ray, DivX. I mean, all these formats some have failed, some have come and gone, but it'll always be around in some format, I think, which is a long-winded way of saying it's not dying anytime soon, physical media.
So how did you get involved in working in the business in Anchor Bay and getting started there?
A variety of circumstances that kind of collided. I was living in Charlotte, North Carolina at the time, didn't really have any kind of a future. I had worked for a few years at a place called Major Video Concepts, which was a tape distributor for video stores, basically. They would send all the new releases out to all the mom and pop stores out there, and some smaller chains. And I worked there for 3 years, and I really enjoyed it. But it went the way of the dodo when Blockbuster started taking over, and they were going direct with the studio. So I was out of a job in April of '97, and the internet was just sort of coming into its early Wild Wild West days. And I started a website called Widescreen Central, which promoted the release of widescreen movies on VHS. And I devoted a subsection of that to Anchor Bay Entertainment, who at that time was starting to come out with all these great horror movies and cult classics in widescreen editions on tape. and then that became anchorbayentertainment.com. They didn't even have a website back then. This was back when a lot of companies didn't know what to do with the internet. They were just like, well, what the hell is this, you know? So I registered anchorbayentertainment.com and did my own essential fan site for the company. One thing led to another, thanks to the efforts of the VP of acquisitions for Anchor Bay named Jay Douglas, who's sadly no longer with us. He, I guess, took a shine to me, and I would talk to him on the phone about upcoming releases, and one thing led to another, and eventually he was like my big supporter in getting me a full-time opportunity with the company up here in Michigan. And in July of 2000, I moved up to Anchor Bay and moved up here to Michigan. I've been here ever since. And that was, to say that was a game changer for my life. I mean, that I was working in Charlotte at a third shift job that was going nowhere, and I hated, and it was just, I didn't know what I was going to do next. And all of a sudden, here I am up in Michigan with a whole new life and working for a company that I loved, and it was quite an experience. And I was at Anchor Bay for not quite 5 years. It was about 4.5 years, and then I went out on my own with Red Shirt Pictures, and that was in 2005, and that's been my job ever since.
So you were mentioning, before we were talking about how it's a niche thing, the collector's market, but even before Anchor Bay, or even concurrently, I mean, if you talk to somebody like Don May Jr.,
Oh, sure.
and you hear that they had, his Elite Entertainment, they had to deal with Anchor Bay, and they would do the mastering and then the pressing for the laser discs, and then Anchor Bay would get the video rights, just video, not even DVD, video.
Yeah, just VHS, because back until '97 there was no DVD, so they would just do the deluxe tape editions of a lot of that stuff.
And so, people would harvest a kidney to be able to buy Halloween or something on Laserdisc for $100.
Right.
But at Anchor Bay, when the tapes started coming out, and then then the DVDs, you start hearing about the Book of the Dead release for Evil Dead, or the Dawn of the Dead release for the Ultimate Edition, the multi-disc. So talk about some of those specialty packaged releases for those cult titles.
Those were amazing times, really, because and if my good friend Mike Ortiz was here, he was a graphic designer at Anchor Bay for a number of years, and then he became the head of graphics after a while, and he worked on a lot of these titles, and God, the stories we could tell about some of these things. Evil Dead, Book of the Dead was an amazing process because no one had ever done a package like that, especially a package that was the size of a DVD case, but was sort of it was a prop replica, a 3D prop replica of something from the movie. So it was sort of a once in a lifetime confluence of events that allowed that to happen. And we were working with a company out of New York who was communicating with a company in China, trying to figure out how to put all these moving parts together. Tom Sullivan had designed the outer wrap, but then decided, figuring out a way to make the book work. And we would and Mike still has them somewhere in a box. I call it the sort of the evolutionary chart of Book of the Dead. Every book that we got was like, okay, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. And the next one would fix 3 things, but then 2 things that got right would suddenly be wrong. And it would just kept getting book after book after. It was months of this process till we finally got one that was all finished. And that was an amazing process because no one had ever done anything like that before. And this was this was back in 2002. And, you couldn't send large files over the internet very easily back then. You had to do all with phone calls and faxes and overnighting FedEx packages and stuff. It was a really challenging process in a lot of ways, but we managed to get it done. And that was a huge success for us. And we won a lot of awards for it. No one had ever done a package like that before. And there's so many stories about that. The one that always jumps to mind with me was we got a sample when they were finally all packaged and everything. We got 2 or 3 boxes into QC to make sure that the caps on the package were put correctly on there and the booklet was in the right place and everything. And I'm in my marketing manager's office, tiny little office up near the front of the building. And we've got 2 or 3 of these boxes and we're opening them all up to check them. And Now, these were fresh off the boat from China, okay?
Right.
Now, that book had 3 different layers of paint and a lacquer on top of it, and then a sealant, and then they were shoved inside a plastic box with a cardboard cap and then wrapped in plastic again. So to say that there were fumes coming off of these things would be an understatement. We actually got a lot of complaints from people initially when they first bought the book. It's like,
People getting high.
oh yeah, no, people were, these things stink to high hell. Well, anyway, we're sitting in the office over, looking and everything. He and I got fucking high as hell off these books because the fumes were just and I remember one of the other marketing people stopped in and say, "So how did the books turn out?" And I remember he and I both just kind of turned to her and went, "Books are good, man. You want to come and get some of this? This is some good book, man." Because there was little holes in the shrink wrap so that they didn't swell, and if you push down real hard, you got a big blast of air with all the fumes in it, and it was just like, yeah, man, these things are awesome. I can see colors that don't exist anymore. It was we were fucking loaded, and so I just remember I don't remember much of that rest of that day. I just was just walking around going, the books are good. You should go get a hit off one, man. And so it was that was amazing, and there were just so many. There was one time, this was right near the end of that process, where the book was almost finished. We got a sample in that looked like we were about ready to say, give it the green light. And they sent us about 4 or 5 of them. And I'm in my office looking at one, kind of just going over it. And I realized that it's the hard outer covering with the rubber book on it. Yeah. And then there's pages in the middle of it. And instead of stitching it in there like you would a book, they had just put 3 basic desk staples in the spine through the pages. And as I'm working with the book, the pages came right out in my hand. Just opening the book and kind of leafing through it. And I went, oh, this is going to be a problem. So I come out of the office. I go to the front conference room where everyone's meeting and discussing, okay, we're ready to go on this book and everything. And I come in, I sit down, I say, we got a problem. I'm at one end of the table, and my marketing manager and the other guys are at the other end of the table. And I said, we got a problem. And it's like, what? It was like, these staples are not enough to keep these pages in the book. I mean, I was in the office and I just, basically it came off in my hand. And they're looking at it and they're kind of going, well, I don't know if it's, you kind of have to tug it. I don't think it's going to be that big a deal. And I'm like, we've left pages in these things for people to get autographs on. You don't understand horror fans. They're going to be bringing these things. We're going to be seeing these things at conventions for the next 20 years. They're going to get a workout. And they're like, I don't know. So what I did is I opened the book. I took all the pages in my hand, leaving the cover free. And I just went, woof. Cover flies off, goes all the way down towards the end of the conference table. And they all just look at that and go, okay, yeah, we got to get that fixed. So it's like, we're not going to be able to, we're going to get so many complaints from this. And so they ended up, if you look at the book, it actually has yellow thread stitching through the middle of it, which solved that problem. But we had a lot of little things like that. The Dawn of the Dead was another interesting story. The look of that package, that whole package, was designed on a Thursday, finished and finessed on a Friday, QC'd on a Saturday, and then went to print on a Monday.
Wow.
Because we had wasted time trying to find the Book of the Dead was a great success for us, but it also raised the bar to a level that we can't do the Book of the Dead for every single thing. That was kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity to do something like that. There is no obvious thing for Dawn of the Dead to do like that. And so we were trying to come, and we got hung up with this black velvet idea somehow to do so it was going to be like a black velvet with the head on there and everything. It's like, okay. And then at the last minute, after kind of dilly-dallying, we realized, oh, it's too expensive. There's no way we can do it. And we were out of time. And so Mike just basically was like, well, here's what we can do. And as a result, he literally whipped that thing together in literally one day, day and a half. And there was no time to second guess it or to route it around the company to get other opinions. It was just like, we got to go. Because we had a street date on it, retail orders are already in. This is Dawn of the Dead. It's a big release. And so that whole thing went in and out of the door like in 4 days. And it's a beautiful package. But that was the situation. It's like, we don't have time now. It's like, we got to get something done. And God bless Mike. He just was like, all right, put this there, this there, this there. And yeah, and that was it. And it's a beautiful package. It's as good as he could have spent 5 months on it and come up with nothing better than that. I mean, that's how good it was. But it was just one of those things where it's like, damn, we pulled that out of our ass, you know. And yet, what I loved about that Dawn of the Dead set was it was so chock full of stuff. When you picked it up, it felt like a brick. So it felt expensive. You know, it just felt like, oh yeah, this is significant. This is worth money. I can feel that it's worth money. And but you know, I have stories on so many. We could do 4 hours on Anchor Bay alone. It was a very memorable time to be there.
On that particular box set, there's the long form documentary about the film, but there's also, the name is escaping me. There's the gentleman who made the mini making of that got upresed and restored for the Dawn of the Dead.
You mean Document of the Dead?
Yeah.
Roy Frumkins' movie. Yes.
Now, can you talk about that? Because I know we're jumping around, but talk about getting that restored for the recent release.
Oh, well, that was all done by Synapse Films. Don May did that. Don May's had the license on that title. In fact, the Anchor Bay made the deal with Synapse to include that on that box set. So that Don would be the one to talk about that. But yeah, at one point he went back to the original 16 millimeter film that Roy had, and they remastered it and restored it and did all that. I wasn't involved in any of that. Back in Anchor Bay, I wasn't really involved in any of the video production stuff because they had a great team of people out in LA that did all that already. First it was David Gregory, who now runs Severin Films, and then a gentleman by the name of Perry Martin took over after David left the company because he was working under Bill Lustig, and Bill Lustig left at one point. And then, so they didn't need me for that sort of stuff. I did help out with research and contacting celebrities here and there. And there were a couple things I did manage to do that were kind of my own pet. The one big one and that's Dawn of the Dead related. When we were going to put that box set together, I said, I want a commentary with the 4 main cast members. I want all 4 of those people in a room together. That was my dream. That was my bucket list thing on this. And so that was my job. I went and contacted everybody, negotiated it, and we recorded it in the conference room of the Helmsley Hotel in New York City. And it was the first time all 4 of them had been together since the movie had been made. And it was like, I'm just sitting there the whole time while they're recording it, just with a bit like this. You know, I was the happiest motherfucker you've ever seen in your life. In fact, there's a photo of me standing in front of all 4 of them there, and I'm just like this. You know, because I couldn't wipe the smile off my face. So getting that done was a big deal. But the video stuff, the actual documentary stuff, didn't really start until after I left Anchor Bay. I did one featurette for Anchor Bay, which was a Linnea Quigley interview for Night of the Demons, which almost didn't happen. But thanks to Linnea's patience and her generosity, she's wonderful. And a couple of really good friends, Mike Watt and Amy Lynn Best, who loaned me their camera when mine got stolen at the last minute. We got that interview shot, and I showed it to Anchor Bay, and they said, this is really good, we'll include it. But there still wasn't an opportunity for me really to do that full-time for the company. And then my position with the company was just phased out. It was one of those situations where a couple different companies took over, and I had a weird position in that company. I did a lot of different things for a lot of different departments. And when the one company took over, they kind of went, well, why isn't this being done by that department? That should be done. So I started losing things to do. And eventually my position just got phased out. But it was sad, but I was ready, you know, at that point to kind of leave. Because I really hadn't been doing very much the last few months I was there. And I kind of saw it coming. It happens sometimes, you know.
So talk about the birth of Red Shirt Pictures.
Yeah, the birth of Red Shirt Pictures. When I did that Night of the Demons featurette, I wanted a name for my company because I figured at that point it would look better. I'm not a big fan of just slapping my name all over everything, you know, because it's like edited by Michael Felsher, directed by Michael Felsher, produced by. I was like, okay, yeah. And so I was like, well, I should kind of come up with a company name to have on this thing, just for the sake of it. I wasn't thinking at that point in terms of leaving Anchor Bay to do that on my own. That happened a little later. And I came up with the name Red Shirt Pictures just kind of out of the blue, because I'm a big Star Trek fan. And I've always been a fan of the red shirt guys in Star Trek who, these poor schmucks who get beamed down to the planet and get blown up, melted, kidnapped, shot, stabbed with a spear, turned into a sugar cube, whatever the hell it is, And so I've always enjoyed that. So I got some perverse kind of glee out of naming my company after those poor bastards.
It's basically, you should have just said, "We're fucked." That's the name of the company.
Yeah, we're fucked. Just say, we're gonna die. Don't beam me down to the planet because I'm not coming back. Because it's always, if you watch, especially on the original show, if you watch, it's like, this is Kirk, Spock, and McCoy and Ensign Smith. Ensign Smith is not coming back to the Enterprise, or pieces of him might, but he's not. So it's just like, I remember there was one episode, I can't remember what the name of it is. I think like 8 of those guys bite it. I mean, it's like a massacre. These guys just left and right are getting killed. But anyway, so I just named my company Red Shirt Pictures. I didn't really give it much thought. And then when I left Anchor Bay, it's like, well, I came up with this Red Shirt Pictures thing. Maybe I should make that a full-time thing. And it was slow going at first, but thankfully, one thing led to another, and one job led to another, and I've been doing it now for 2005. So what's that? Almost coming up on 18 years.
How did you come up with the logo with the hand and stuff?
Well, the logo itself, the actual Red Shirt Pictures logo, was designed by Mike Ortiz, my friend from Anchor Bay, because he's a gifted designer. So I've gone to him for a lot of little things like that, where it's like, I need a logo. Can you do it? And he just comes back to me and say, oh, that's perfect. That's right, exactly what I was thinking. But the actual video logo that appears at the end of all the featurettes, that was shot in my basement of my house in Berkeley, Michigan, which I know I haven't had in years, but it was just me filming my hands, cutting up a shirt, and then rearranging, and there's a lot of reverse photography in there, and I just shot all that stuff and then processed the hell out of it in Adobe Premiere, and that's the logo. So those are actually my hands, and cutting up an old red shirt that I had, which I still have. If you were to turn the camera, actually I can show you. Hold on a second. Up there on the wall, that's the little red shirt in the video logo.
Very nice.
I framed it and left it there, so that's the actual one.
But that was back in the aughts. So what did you do when now you put it on high def stuff? Is it just still have the same up-res kind of look, or is it redesigned?
Yeah, I just up-resed it, and because also it's got a lot of grime and dirt. It's kind of for the lack of a better phrase, it looks kind of grindhousey. Yeah. So it's supposed to look kind of rough around the edges. So it wasn't hard. So, and I actually did a remaster of the logo about 3 years ago, and I went back to the original footage and cleaned it up as best I could, but also just did what I could to. But yeah, it was shot. And that was back in the days where I was still shooting standard def. But that ended. I didn't shoot standard def for very long. I started shooting in HD, or at least HDV, which was basically the mini DV version of HD, in 2006. And so that, I was shooting in HD pretty early on, but I wasn't delivering in HD for quite a while. That didn't start really until like 2009, 2010. And then now I've been shooting in 4K since 2015. Haven't really done any 4K delivery on anything yet, because with bonus features, they don't really need that stuff in 4K. But so I'm always shooting in the newest format that I can get my hands on. But in terms of delivery, things tend to lag a lot behind that. But
so in the early stages of like when Red Shirt branched out, was on its own, I know I'm bad with the timeline, but I know you did the Chainsaw 2 documentary, then you did Night of the Creeps, and you did Monster Squad,
mm-hmm.
and then the Flesh Wounds, seven stories of the Saw.
Yeah.
But which one out of those was the first one you did in high def?
Let's see, AfterEffects was in standard. There were a couple of interviews one interview on Texas Chainsaw 2 that was shot in HD, and I think there was one or two in Flesh Wounds, but both of those were delivered in standard def. Monster Squad was completely shot in HD. That was an early one. Creepshow was the same time. That was shot in HD. So yeah, that would say Monster Squad was around the time where I went full HD. Because I started HDV on the set of Diary of the Dead for George, and we shot all that stuff in HD, or at least a primitive version of it, but HD nonetheless. And then I shot onto tapes until 2008, and then Survival of the Dead was the first time I ever shot digitally to essentially what were sort of a prototype of flashcards, and that was a weird experience, because when my DP on Survival of the Dead said, we're going to use this camera and we shoot to these cards, I'm like, but where's the footage? I understand it with the tape. I can see it. It's right here. It's all right on this tape. But it's the foot. Ooh, I don't know about this. I was really kind of like, I don't know. I was like, what happens if the files don't try? 1 week later, I'm like, fuck tapes. Tapes can go to hell. I'm so done with tapes, man. And ever since then, it's been like, I have a collection. You can see it right over my shoulder here. Those are my mini DV tapes, masters, of all the stuff I shot on mini DV. And I haven't added a tape to that in 15 years or something like that. I don't know how long it's been, but yeah. So that was the technology changes pretty fast. So I like to be an early adopter as quickly and as economically as I can, because you're kind of future-proofing this stuff to some degree.
As a filmmaker, because I mean, what you're doing is still, you're making a film.
Mm-hmm.
It's a short film. It's nonfiction, but it's still a film.
Yeah.
So you make different choices based on how you're feeling, and sometimes the politics or economics of things. And most filmmakers, most of them don't like to go back and tinker with their work. But when you have new editions of things that come out, like as an example, when Just Desserts came out as a separate release, you have all these extra features. Yeah. You got interviews that were not included in the original documentary, but you didn't feel the need to go back and insert those into the existing documentary. But I remember hearing you say that for, I think, Monster Squad or one of the other ones, you decided to go back and actually change it. Discuss that process of why to do it on one and not another.
That's a really good question, because I actually did it again recently with AfterEffects, my first full-length documentary. I released it on my own label, Redshirt Video, and I added, I think, 10, 12 minutes back into it. And, there are times where, like with Just Desserts, when I was going to release that, by itself, I thought about, well, maybe I should, but then I thought, I was so happy with the way that turned out.
Even though Michael Gornick, the DP, wasn't included, that him being inserted into the documentary, it just wouldn't have fit it. It
wouldn't have fit, because the documentary was shot at a specific, and by the time that I was going to release it by itself, it was almost 10 years later. And it's like, no, this doesn't work, because too much time has passed. And that needs to be what it was back then. Now, I did add like an audio interview with Mike that's on there. And so I did some peripheral stuff around with people who weren't available to me back when I did the documentary. But I didn't want to pull apart that doc. I didn't want to do that. To me, it was just like, it has to be what it was back then, and just kind of leave it alone, because and I don't want to add in interviews that were shot 10 years later. It would have felt weird to me. Whereas with AfterEffects, I didn't shoot anything new for that. I just went back and fleshed it out a little bit more to talk more about the sort of the Pittsburgh filmmaking community, which was something I had thought about doing for a while. And I thought, well, there's no harm in that, because the original short version will always exist, and this will just be its own unique thing. Monster Squad was kind of where I learned I didn't want to do that ever again, because I did the initial documentary, and then I think like a year and a half later, they were going to do the Blu-ray, and I had access to a couple more special effects people that I didn't have access to back when I did the original doc. And so I did a re-edit with new interviews, and it felt weird. I think the documentary was better for it at the end of the day, but it was just kind of like, when am I ever going to be finished with this thing then? You know, I'm always just, at some point, it's just like, it's got to be what it is. It was an interesting situation that happened with Flesh Wounds, 7 Stories of the Saw, which was for the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There was a review of it that went up several years after it came out because it was part of one of the many re-releases of Chainsaw. And this guy took my documentary to task, one segment in particular. He didn't like the cutting that I did for the Daniel Pearl interview, which I did, like, it was kind of flashy with, you know, suddenly there'd be a shot in black and white, and then it'd be full screen, and then he'd be in you know, full color. And
I like that.
Yeah, well, it was and I was very new as an editor back then. And I was experimenting with stuff and trying out different things, kind of throwing stuff against the wall to see what would stick. And he said, you know, this really didn't work, and I just was very distracting and blah, 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 blah. And some guys kind of rushed to my defense and said, hey, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I went in, it was one of the few times I've ever posted on a forum, and said, you know, and I kind of agree with him. If I was doing that now, I would do that kind of thing. But at the same time, those were the creative decisions I made back then. And I have to respect that that's where I was at that point in my career. Whether it's lasted well or held up or what, I mean, I can't do anything about that. And I came at all those decisions through an honest creative process. So like him or don't like him, that's fine. And I didn't find his criticisms to be unfair or, you know, personally an attack or anything like that. It was just one of the situations where it's like, you know what, he has a point in my view. And I wouldn't edit that the same way now, but I'm a much different filmmaker than I was back when I did that. And I've had situations where I've had an opportunity to redeliver some of my older work that I did shoot in HD but delivered in standard definition. I've had the opportunity to go back and redeliver it in HD because, like, they'll re-release something of, you know, that I did back then again, and this time instead of just delivering an old standard def master, I'll go back to my original project files and output a new HD master. And there's always that temptation to go in and start fucking with things and messing, you know, and every now and then I'll think about, well, maybe there was some validity to, but then again, it's like, no, just got to leave it as it is, you know? It's one thing to clean it up and make it look a little bit better. That's fine. Yeah. But, you know, I'm not going to start adding in or changing edits around and stuff. It's like, at some point, you just got to be done. You know, you just got to just be like, I don't have time to be sitting here for 2 days reworking an old featurette from 2012. You know, it's just like, let it be what it is. Make it look as good as it's supposed to, and then send it on its way. So, yeah, there's always a tendency and a desire to go back and change a whole bunch of stuff. And, you know, you allow yourself certain things, but when it comes to wholesale revisionism and stuff like that, I tend not to be a fan of it. Because I like the fact that these things mark you in time. They show you who you were when you made them. And sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. And that's okay. It's really okay.
Well, I got to tell you that, you know, there's some things that complement each other. And I know that the seven stories of the Saw and David Gregory's Shocking Truth, and then the, you know, just extra, like there was Terry McMahon, she did Off the Hook.
Right.
You know,
so that one,
yeah. So you have those extras, like every time you buy Chainsaw 1, I guess I already ordered the
new 4K that's coming.
The 4K one. I saw a split screen where they show you, like, when it's Dolby Vision, they do a little thing where it moves and it shows you the monument at the beginning of the corpse.
Right.
You know, they showed you the Blu-ray version, and it was kind of like, it looked like a sun flare. You know, it was reddish and auburn and stuff. And then it showed you the remastered version. Holy cow! You could see like ligaments and it just it's so creepy that the 4K brings out so much of that 16 millimeter that it's like, holy cow.
Yeah, because I mean, really, with 16 millimeter, 4K is technically kind of overkill because there's really only so much detail you can suck out of 16 millimeter. But if it's done right, there is a surprising amount of detail still if depending on how the movie's shot and everything, and how the authoring and encoding and the color correction, all that's done, the results can be quite stunning, especially when it comes to the color. That's one thing that HDR and the whole Ultra HD experience. I mean, it's the color is just amazing when it's done right. I mean, like something like Suspiria, or it's just like, oh my god, you can never go back to anything else ever again. But it was interesting with the 7 stories I saw. The reason I did that the way that I did it was I didn't want to duplicate what David had done with Shocking Truth.
Well, he didn't get Daniel Pearl, and he didn't get Edward Neal, so
right, that was
you got those people.
That was what I did. I looked at what he'd done. It's like, well, who can I get that David didn't get, or what can I focus on that David didn't in that particular piece? And so that way my piece would not duplicate his efforts and would stand on its own, or at least stand side by side with his. And that was very important to me, because I really loved what he did. I really respect David a great deal, and I wasn't just going to redo what he already did just because it would have been a few years newer at that point. I'm not a big fan of just reshooting people that have already spoken authoritatively about something. There are a couple companies out there that do that. It's like, well, they have a new release, so we got to reshoot everybody. I'm like, but what else are they going to say? You're going to have, I don't know. I have a little bit of a problem with that, because it's like, now you're just now it's just becoming repetitious. Unless you have a new insight or a new angle on something, let what's been done speak for itself. Yeah, I countered that on The Howling when I did that for Scream Factory. The previous featurette that had been done was very, very good. And it's just like, well, let me take an approach let me shoot around, and let me shoot people that they didn't get and try some different things. And sometimes that's fun. Sometimes having limitations like that can really push you into areas that you might not have considered otherwise.
So the when you did Flesh Wounds, and then you also did the Off the Hook with Terry McMahon, which one came first, and why wasn't she included in the Flesh Wounds?
That's interesting. That Off the Hook came afterwards, and actually David Gregory shot that for me. So he was. We were trading. It was like he and I were in a contest. There's like, who can do the most featurettes or documentaries for Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He's winning now, I think, by 2. But no, she came afterwards. When I first, I approached Terry originally on Flesh Wounds to do an interview, and at the time she wasn't engaging with the fan community at all. She was, off by herself. She didn't really know how to feel about the movie. She wasn't ashamed of it by any stretch at all, but she was like, that's back then, I'm me now, and that's it. And she agreed to meet me when I was out there, and we had lunch. It was very pleasant, but at the end she just went, Michael, I just don't know I want to do this. And so I let it go, And it was only later she, I think, hooked back up with a couple more of the cast members, and she finally did a convention, and suddenly she was like, oh, I'm really enjoying this. And so she turned, and so I contacted her again when another edition of Chainsaw rolled around, and she was all about doing the interview then. And I don't get a chance to see her very often, but when I do, it's always very pleasant. And she's done a complete 180 on her, her interaction with the fans, and in terms of her association with the movie. It's so interesting for me to look back and compare her to the person I first met to the one that can go and bump into at a convention now. So that's why that happened.
I can tell you that, it's like her being skittish about the fans and not knowing how to feel about it. When I was a teenager, I ran a fan website for Jason films and stuff. And there wasn't Crystal Lake Memories, even the book.
Right.
I'm 42. I'm an old man too. And so I was a goober little teenager and just said, called up agencies and said, hey, can you put me in contact with this celebrity? Or I even did AOL search, and I found certain people through email handles. And one of the first person I spoke to was Sean Cunningham, and he told me to politely fuck off, and then, but which is weird. He kind of brushed me off, but he gave me the personal email and phone number of Harry Manfredini, Victor Miller, and Kane Hodder, just as a way to make me go away. But he still gave me a roadmap to contact other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I contacted Harry, which is funny because now we're friends, and I interviewed him for this podcast, and to this day we still joke around that when I spoke to Harry, he said, "How did you get my number?" I said, "Well, Sean gave it to me." He goes, "Ha ha ha! No, really, how did you get my number?" but later on, he came to realize that was probably true. But we have a good laugh about it now. But he said on one of his shows that he didn't do conventions. He didn't really know that there was that people cared enough to know who made that signature music and the sound and stuff. He went to I think the book signing for Crystal Memories.
Oh, right.
And he got in. He saw Victor, and he saw Adrian, and he saw Ari, and he suddenly realized that there's a fan base for this, and these are fun people. He had never really met them, and he said ever since that, Adrian and Amy Steele and all of them started to say, you should come to these conventions. And suddenly they just became these convention darlings. They went to all the conventions. Apparently Tom Savini and Victor Miller and Harry do rubber band wars,
Oh yeah. I've been caught in the crossfire of a couple of those. And Tom was always very vicious with his rubber band attacks. He actually I actually have it now. He gave it to me. He had a rubber band gun. That was this wooden gun with clothespins, and he would load it up, and he was a 2-shot. You could fire and nail you with 2 at the same time.
Nice.
Yeah.
There's so many boutique labels that are, some of them have come and gone. Some of them are still trucking. You got Synapse Films, you got Scream Factory, you got Severon, you got Blue Underground, you got all these companies. And now you've been the champion of bringing back Vestron Pictures through Lionsgate. So talk about working with those other companies, and then also how you brought Vestron back.
Well, I've been working. I've known Don May. I did the Synapse's original website back in the day, and actually, I met him. Apparently, I met him at there was a signing with George Romero at the Monroeville Mall back in 1996, I think, maybe 94. I can't remember. Somewhere in there, like between 94 and 96. And I don't even know how I found out about it. I think I got on Elite Entertainment's mailing list, because I remember mailing them an offer saying, please let me work for you because I love you guys, because I was already a huge fan of all the work they were doing. And I went up to Pittsburgh, and I went to the Monroeville Mall, and that's where I first met George Romero. Don May was there, and I never met him. Jay Douglas, who I mentioned before, he was there, never met him. And like 3 other people that would later become lifelong friends were there, never met any of them. But they were all there that day. And I got put on camera by someone talking about Dawn of the Dead. And that ended up on the Elite Laserdisc box set of Dawn of the Dead as a fan testimonial. And that later got sampled by Perry Martin for the Dawn of the Dead documentary that he did. He said, when I found out you were in that, I had to use it in there somewhere. I'm like, oh no. So it's in there. But, so I've known Don May and then one thing led to another, and Don May ended up moving up here to Michigan, and I got to know him, and he's been my longest friend in the business. So I've worked with them forever. They gave me a lot of my first early jobs. But then Scream Factory, then there was, Cliff McMillan over there, and then I've worked with David Gregory at Severin a whole bunch, and then I got to do studio work. Texas Chainsaw 2 was the proposal I just sent in blind to MGM, and they responded and went, hey, that sounds like a good idea. Good luck. I'm like, oh. It's like, okay. And so that led to, and then I think through that, I also, because I think I met her when I was at Anchor Bay, a woman named Shayla Johnson, who's now over, I believe, at Saban Films, but at the time she was with Lionsgate, and they had just acquired the Republic Pictures catalog. And I knew that Monster Squad was part of that catalog. And I mentioned to her, I said, by the way, you should look into that. I believe Monster Squad's in there. And she's like, it is? I was like, I can't believe that we wouldn't have done something with that. I was like, I believe it's there. Well, she calls me back and she looks and says, like, we do have it. And then I just said, well, here's all the crazy shit I want to do for it. She's like, here's your money, go. I was like, oh. And that started off a long relationship with Lionsgate. And Lionsgate, I had this idea of bringing back Vestron Video years before we actually did it. And I would send in proposals to my people over at Lionsgate that I work with. And it was always a slow starter because it's like they're a big corporation. And, you know, getting them to focus on doing a cult label was kind of like... But eventually enough right people over there took interest in it. And we started that off back in 2016, I think. And it's still going strong. I'm working on 2 or 3 more of them right now. So it's been great to really mine the catalog of not just titles that Vestron Pictures and Vestron Video actually did back then, but titles that, quite frankly, they would have done had they had the opportunity to. Titles that go across all genres. So that's been a really fun thing, and it was nice to see that that dream kind of come to fruition. Not just because of what I proposed, but because of you know, several people over at Lionsgate who went, "Hey, this is a cool idea." You know, sometimes it's about just getting the right thing in front of the right people at the right time, and so that's how that all got started.
It's refreshing as a fan and a collector that a lot of these companies and even yourself, you know, vis-a-vis through the companies who actually champion this and make it happen, spearheading it, that filmmakers like Carpenter and Hooper and Romero, Craven, that like catalogs of their work like would be coming out. Like, so you'd have like a bunch of films come out through each company by all these different artists. So you get those artists, you know, to come in and do interviews and commentaries and stuff.
Oh yeah, I mean that's been the big benefit. I think that, you know, I take it very seriously. I mean, I'm documenting the creative process of people who went and made movies, which is a Herculean effort. To get a movie made is a big goddamn deal. And I always use this as an example. I mean, you can make fun of a movie like Nail Gun Massacre, but you know what? The guy who made that, he had an idea. He figured out how to do it. He put some money behind it. He got money raised for it. He put the people together and he went and shot and he made a fucking movie. You know, that's more than most people do. So that's to be celebrated. And then there's stories behind how that got done, which are fascinating in you know, even outside the movie itself. So to be able to document people's dreams and ambitions and aspirations and sometimes their failures and their setbacks and how they rebounded or sometimes how they didn't, I consider that very, very valuable. And it's a real privilege to do that. In association with that, getting to meet all these people and work with them sometimes several times, and sometimes these people end up becoming friends, some become good friends, some become like family. It's, you know, how the hell did that happen? You know, I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, it's such a, sometimes I just sit back and go, if I told my Fangoria reading self from 1986, guess what's going to happen to you? And guess who you're going to get to meet and work with and do all these things? He would have been like, yeah, bullshit, get out of my face. You know, it would never would have imagined that anything like that could happen. So I've been extraordinarily lucky to have not only done it on films that I actually really care about and discover films that I didn't even know about and document those processes and those people who made them, but to have been doing it for as long as I have and just all the different people that I've come into contact with that were making movies while I was growing up. And I've gotten to work with all the big guys in one form or another. Some I became very, very tight and close with, people like George Romero. You know, George was a close personal friend. Tom Savini is a close personal friend. I consider these people part of my family. You know, and then there's other people who I didn't get to work with very much, sadly, before they passed away, but I got to meet them. I got to talk with them about their work, and like people like Toby Hooper and Wes Craven, you know, and Stuart Gordon. You know, I mean, it's like, good Lord. You know, I've had, and it's been almost an embarrassment of riches, really, in terms of what I've gotten to do and who I've gotten to do it with.
There's a lot of people that are the unsung heroes a lot of times that pull the strings behind the scenes and they don't get enough love and credit. So can you talk about how you get to work with Anya Leaked, and Heather Buckley?
Anya and I met, I think the first time she and I met was at the first Texas Frightmare show in, I think, 2006. because that's where I filmed some Texas Chainsaw 1 and 2 stuff, because there was a reunion going on. And then she and I just kept in touch, and I was getting ready to do Pumpkinhead. And I think at Cinema Wasteland in Ohio or something. I can't remember where I was, but she came up to me and she had heard that I was doing Pumpkinhead. She says, I'm producing Pumpkinhead for you. I'm like, what? So I'm producing Pumpkinhead for you. That's just all there is to it. It's like, all right. And I was like, fine, I could use the help, because I used to be kind of a one-man band for the first few years. And my whole thing was like, I'll just do it all myself. Well, that's nice. But after a while, it's like, no, I need help. I can't do all this by myself. I don't know how to do a lot of this stuff yet. And also, you take on all that work yourself, eventually you're just going to short circuit. And so Anya and I worked together for a number of years, produced, I can't even imagine how many different things. And then for the life of me, I can't remember how Heather and I first met. It just seems like at one point in my life I didn't know her, and then suddenly I'd known her forever. So it's one of those type of situations. And,
No, didn't I remember hearing a story about Heather, something to do with you and Heather, and then the caravan of people going to Benihana's for Texas Chainsaw, for Evil Dead, the cast and crew reunion or something?
No, Heather wasn't around. That was for Anchor Bay way back in the day.
Oh, okay.
No, she wasn't back there for that. But I can't. I'm sure she would remember. My memory is kind of all over the map these days, it seems. But she was just so smart and so with it, and such a good producer. And I would, from my perspective, I would definitely want to work with her. And she did a whole bunch of stuff with me, and she still does. I mean, she's gone on to produce films. She did The Ranger a couple years ago, and she's had a really successful career. So she moved on from me pretty quick. I knew that. I had a feeling with Heather was going to be like, I'm only going to be able to underpay her for her work like I do everybody else, sadly, for a limited bit of time before she's just going to go on to bigger and better things. Because that's the thing about this business in terms of DVD and extras and stuff like that. There ain't a lot of money. And so you kind of have to be honest with people from the beginning. It's like, I'm not going to be able to pay you very much because I ain't getting very much, because I'm not living in some palatial estate up in Malibu, from this work. You do it because you love it, and you do it enough to pay the bills, but you're not going to be able to retire on this stuff really. Which I should probably think about that more now as I get older. But so people do it for the love, but at the end of the day, sometimes it's like, yeah, the love's great, but I really would like to pay my water bill. Thanks.
Has there ever been a project where the budget they gave for what you needed to do, that you actually wanted to go and get this one person so much that you're like, I'm willing to go out of pocket?
On more projects than I should ever admit to. Several of them I lost money on, which was on if I had an accountant, he would come up and just slap me in the face. But from my perspective, it's like, no, I really want. And they were usually on big projects where there were a lot of people, but it's like, I need this one more guy. Or this one person who I didn't think was going to get suddenly became available. Now, a lot of times you can go back to the distributor and say, hey, we need these people. But at some point, they're going to go, that's enough. But for me, it was never enough. That's one of my problems, that sometimes I don't know when to quit and just say, that's it. This is the cutoff. I don't care if, the most amazing person in the world shows up tomorrow. We've got to put a stop to this. I'm always like, to the last minute, who else can we shove in there? And it's, so no, I've gone out of pocket. I would probably at least a dozen times, probably more, on projects that I just care too much, damn it. It sounds really, I'm kind of full of myself there, but no, there were projects where it's just like, I really need these people, and fuck it, I don't care. Let's just do it.
There is, I might not be pronouncing this person, Laurent Buzzerier.
Oh yes, yeah, he was a long time veteran of this sort of thing. He was doing it back in the Laserdisc days.
And Jeffrey Schwartz, those guys,
Schwartz, yeah, I know Jeffrey.
Yeah.
I've never met Laurent, but I've met Jeffrey or spoken to Jeffrey several times. He's done some really great stuff. In fact, there have been a couple of featurettes he's done for releases that I got to work on later, where I'm like, I don't want to duplicate what he did. I mean, what he did may be 10 years old or 12 years old at this point, but so what? Like The Howling, that was one. It was just like, I don't want to duplicate. I think that was one he did. But there's a couple others that he did. I was like, I don't want to duplicate what he did. What's the point? And I felt that way about I don't remember the name of the director who did the Thing documentary, The Terror Takes Shape.
Yeah.
That was done for it's like,
Amazing.
I don't want to replicate that. First of all, there's people in that are no longer with us. And two, it's like, that was as thorough as you could possibly hope for. And they got Rob Bottin. I ain't getting Rob Bottin. So when I did The Thing, again, I styled it around that, and there was plenty of stuff to do. But it's like, no, I'm not a big fan of just reshooting something. So it's like, oh, it's new. Well, that's great. But what is it giving me that hasn't already been gotten? Laurent's done some great. His Jaws documentary, his original Jaws, the full length one that he did on the Laserdisc, was fantastic. And he's done a lot of Spielberg stuff. And then Jeffrey did his Automat Pictures. He's done. I don't even know how many he's done. But they're both great guys. They're both really terrific at what they do. And they were early. Them and David Gregory, those guys were all very big early influences on me in terms of that's how you do it. That's the approach that you take with this. You take it seriously. You do the best thorough job that you can, and you apply it. You take a filmmaker's aesthetic to this. It's not just about a marketing piece.
They say to be careful meeting your heroes, but it sounds like you've got a chance to meet like people you never thought you would.
Yeah.
So what was it like being considered a friend and in the family of friends to Romero and Savini and others?
George Romero was my filmmaking idol growing up. I worshipped him from afar as a filmmaker from the time I was 10 years old. And if I could have picked any one filmmaker I would have wanted to meet, work with, hang out with, it would have been him over everybody else. So the fact that somehow circumstances led to me not only getting to meet him, but to work with him on several occasions and eventually hang out with him. At one point, I hung out on I ended up sleeping on his couch. Because he's like, no, Michael, don't go back to your house. It's too late. Just chill out here. And his cat attacked my feet all night. I remember that. Hamilton, his cat. Who, little bit of trivia, I filmed George in his apartment in Toronto many, 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 many times. Hamilton, his cat, managed to make a cameo in almost every single interview I ever did with him. He always found a way to get in the background of the shot, or his tail walks through a shot, and he always figured out when to do it when George was saying something crucial that I had to use in the edit. Hamilton was able to go, oh, he's going to use this, so I'm going to jump into the shot at this point.
Sounds like your podcasts whenever you do your videos and then your
when my
cat
shows up.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, they're very intuitive that way. And then George and I, we would just hang out. I would just towards the last several years, we would talk about his movies, and I would do interviews with him when I had to. But most of the time, it was just like I was going to go out and dinner and shoot the shit about politics and stuff going on, and it was amazing. In the end, he was several different things to me throughout the course of my life. He was a far off filmmaker that I worshipped kind of from afar, and then he became a work colleague in a way, and then he became someone I collaborated with, and then he became a friend during all of that. Tom Savini is the same way. Tom's one of my favorite people on the planet. He's one of the most generous, caring, funniest people. I love him to death. I would do anything for that guy if he asked me to. And there, Gunnar Hansen was another person who I went to about 40 different conventions just because he was there so I could hang out with him. Because he lived up in Maine, so it wasn't easy just to get up there all the time. I would have loved these people even if they hadn't done all this great work, and so that is something that I'll never be able to fully wrap my head around, how lucky I've been that not only did I find them great and want to be friends with them, that it was reciprocated to me. How did that happen? So yeah, in terms of meeting your heroes, I've been very lucky in that regard. I haven't had too many bad experiences. with the amount of people that I've met and worked with, you're bound to have a few, bad apples in the bunch. But there's nobody that I've met and worked with that I was like, I would like to murder that person if I had the opportunity. No, that's never happened. I've just had people like, well, I'm not working with that son of a bitch again. But that's not bad. That's, when you look at it, that's really not that bad.
So when you do a documentary, because I've done a few of them myself, and I'm
Mhm.
working on one right now, so you come to each one from a different perspective. I noticed that on some releases, there's the long form documentary, and sometimes
Mhm.
sometimes there's the featurettes
Right.
or individual interviews.
Mhm.
So how much research do you do ahead of time, and how do you determine what order to do the interviews? Because I've heard some people say sometimes you leave the really big interview for the last one. That way
Mhm.
you can fill in the gaps of what you're missing. So what is your
Sure.
process? What's your process?
It's totally project dependent. If it's a movie that I know really well anyway, then it's a situation where it's like, well, it's less about doing the research ahead of time. It's more about prioritizing who you get, and because you always cast a wide net whenever you start a project. I want all these people. Now that may be 15 people. You're not going to get 15 people. So you're hoping you reach out to 15, hoping for 10, and you maybe end up with 6 or 7. And then there's times where you rope in 15, and sometimes you end up with 21 fucking people. And you're like, okay, how the hell did that happen? And then sometimes you rope in trying to get 15, and you get 1. So that process, it's just totally dependent on who's available where, and any number of factors come into play. If it's a movie you know really well, you kind of know where to start from in terms of, I know that this happened, I know to talk to this person about this. You do tend to want to save the big interviews for last because you know that they're going to cover more ground and they're going to form the spine of the piece. So you want to get as much other ancillary information from all your other interviews as possible so they can illuminate you to something maybe you didn't know that you can then key off with, and then make sure that that last interview really covers all the bases and can really support all these other views on it or in association with it. But you don't want to go into, I discovered this early on, you don't want to go into any document or any project with a preformed idea of what your final product's going to be. Like you think about, well, I want to start off with talking about this, I want to make it about this, and I want the tone of the piece to be this. That's great, but in the end, the footage that you get is going to dictate to you what your story is, or what the tone of the piece overall and what the pacing is going to be. The people are going to dictate that to you. So until you get into the editing room, you don't really know what you've got. And you can do all the research you want and make sure that you've covered all the topics to the best, so you know that you have the material there. But the tone and the overall approach that you're going to take in terms of assembling that footage, that's not something you can get until you get the footage up in front of you in your editing software, and you're like, oh, okay, so all right, so this is more of a down period here than I thought, or these people have more of a negative opinion of this than I thought, or oh, okay, that's more and so you just the footage, you listen to what they're telling you, not just in what they're telling you in terms of what their memories are, what they're actually saying, but what their body language is telling you, what their eyes are telling you, what their the subtext of what's going on. That all that stuff comes into play. So there is sort of a boilerplate process to some of this stuff, but you really, again, you have to just you do as much work as you can ahead of time, and you just let the people tell you their stories and work with what you get. And that's once I didn't realize that at first. That's something you kind of come into realizing the more you do this. It's like, oh, okay. So just and don't be afraid to adjust on the fly. If you get 2 or 3 interviews and you realize, okay, this production was a little bit more, oh, there was more of this than I thought there was. Include those questions going forward. But you don't want to lead people to anything either. You don't want to set them up by saying, I heard that this guy was really difficult to work with. Why was he difficult to work with? You don't want to do that. You want to set up and say, discuss your memories of working with so-and-so. Don't lead them into something. Let them be honest with what they want to tell you. And then you can, if you sense that there's something there, you can pry a little bit further or back off. And it's interesting how some people remain very guarded even after all these years. And then I've had a couple of projects where people just let it fly. The one that always comes to mind was Tales from the Crypt, Bordello of Blood. The piece I did on that. Everybody was brutally honest about that movie. About we should never have gone to Vancouver. Why did we do this? Dennis Miller was an asshole. I couldn't believe it. I mean, to a person, everyone was just like, yeah, no, I acted like a bitch on that. They were right. I was like, God, And so I put that whole thing together, and actually my editor submitted the final cut, and I went, studio's never going to approve this. They're never going to let this through. Are you kidding me? They did. No problem. And I'm like, all right. And so that, Raw Maniac Cop 3, same situation. Everyone was just, they were all just like, I don't care at this point. I'll just tell you how I feel about it. And that's wonderful. But then there's also times where it's one thing to be candid and honest about how you feel about something, but it's another thing to harp on something to a point where you're just like, okay, I get it, let it go. I did a commentary, or I produced a commentary with a filmmaker for a movie where he had had real problems with his lead star. And the moderator on the commentary was a friend of mine, was in there with him, and the guy would just not let up bashing his lead actor over and over and over again. And the moderator, my buddy, was desperately trying to get him off the subject, but he kept going back to it over and over and over again. And I got a half an hour to the commentary, and I called him up and said, thanks for moderating this, but I can't use this. I can't, we're not getting any information out of him other than this guy sucks. And it's like, that's great, but it's not making anybody look good. So that commentary just went in the waste paper basket, basically. Because it's like, no, it's like, I'm all for brutal honesty, but at some point it's just like, okay, we get it. You didn't like the guy. What else you got? Turns out nothing. So it's a crapshoot with these things sometimes, and you have to, sorting out some of these stories can be different, especially when you get like a major set incident or a major thing that happens on a film set that 8 people remember and have clear stories about, but none of the stories line up because no one remembers. It's like a Rashomon. Everyone remembers everything differently. So you got to figure out, okay, well, what's the truth here? What really happened? And you figure out, well, I think this person had probably the best perspective on it because they weren't directly involved and didn't have an agenda here, whereas these people maybe did. And so it's a process of discovery, and it's not very scientific, but that's just the way it goes. But that's the fun of it. That's what keeps it interesting,
The last person I interviewed was Adam Marcus, and he had
sure.
raving reviews.
He's a raving maniac, that Adam Marcus.
Right. Damn Skippy. No,
he's a great guy. I've really enjoyed working with him recently.
So both of us, over different times, have been, investors in that documentary. We've been, the fan community has stepped up and said, we want to see this movie. And so,
I have my Hearts of Darkness poster over here somewhere.
Oh yeah,
I got it in the mail at some point, like months.
It's really, really cool. The chrome mask, everything. So there was lots of interviews done. As I understand it, before you came on board, and then you came on, and what Adam said was you told him your pitch for what your story you wanted to tell about this, and it made him weep. So, what can you tell us of how you pitched this to him? And secondly, were there people that you suggested interviewing that you could, as a director, bring on this element that they didn't already have?
Well, this was kind of a unique situation because I stepped in when the previous director was let go for reasons that I don't really it's none of my business. But when they came to me, they had already severed their relationship with them. And I talked with Adam about it. And I was interested in trying this because my stuff is usually self-generated, or I'm there from the very beginning and I manage every aspect of it as much as possible. I often edit my own pieces. It's, not all the time, but a lot of the time I do. So I really manage the full project from beginning to end. This was going to be a different situation where I was going to be part of a team, and there was an editor already assigned to this. and there was going to be a composer. I mean, there was going to be. I was brought in essentially to sort of give a creative direction for how the documentary was supposed to, because they had all this footage. The everything was shot by the time I got there, and they had covered. They didn't need anybody else really. We did shoot some additional material, which I can't really get into, but it wasn't interview stuff per se. It was more of a framing thing, a device that will be used in the documentary. But I'll be able to talk about that more later. But so it was really just a matter of looking at the footage and figuring out, well, what's the story? Like kind of like what I was talking about. What is the footage telling me? What is this documentary really about? And my whole perspective is like, if it's just about the making of Jason Goes to Hell, that's not enough. What's this really about? And when you watched Adam's interview, it was like, oh, this is about him. This is the Adam Marcus story in a way, of which Jason Goes to Hell plays a major role. But that was for me what was so appealing, because Adam's a very ebullient, very thoughtful, very just an extremely well-spoken dude. He can really get in. He can get into the particulars of how he was feeling and what his approaches were on any given shot, any given particular piece of material, with a great deal of detail. He's a natural showman. He's very, very good at that. And yet at the same time, he will let his guard down and tell you, okay, I wasn't sure about this, and I was feeling kind of ambivalent about, so it wasn't all, he didn't just put up a performance. It wasn't just a facade. And it was a long, long interview where he went really in depth on a lot of stuff, some of which had nothing to do with Jason Goes to Hell. And so I guess my approach to him when I talked to him was, this is really about, Jason Goes to Hell will be sort of the framing device that we use to tell your story about you as a filmmaker, about you getting to make your first movie and what you discovered about that process and how it influenced your career and your creative life before, during, and after. That was really where I found, it's like, that's really what this is what's speaking to me. And because again, if it's just about Jason Goes to Hell and there's nothing else to it, that's not enough to me. There needs to be something else that's really driving the show here. And I think he responded well to I think we went into more detail about it, but he responded well to that, and he brought me on. And my role on this has been very different than my other projects. I've been sort of, I would say, I want more of this, I want less of that. Let's try this, let's try that. And then I get work back to look at. And, so in a weird way, I almost felt like I wasn't doing enough, because it's like, well, I'm so used to getting in there into the edit and pulling pieces out and doing all the, building the robot, so to speak. And now in this one, I'm not really doing that, but I knew that going in, that would be the process. And I wanted to try and see what that was like. And so far it's been a very good, just working with Adam has been great. And, he and his wife, Deborah, are just great people. And I would like to just say that they show, if you haven't seen it, check out their movie Secret Santa.
Oh yeah, I've seen it. Love it.
It is so much fucking fun. It's so wicked and fun. And it deserves to be seen by a lot more people. And it will be soon. I can't describe how, but soon it will be much more readily available for people to watch. But it's you got to check it out. And so right now, we just completed this one bit of major filming we wanted to do for it. And we're going to be steaming right ahead, train full speed and getting this thing done, and it'll be out this year. So, we'll see how it all turns out. But there's some really wonderful material in this thing that it's much more than just the making of a Friday the 13th movie.
So when I interviewed him, Adam Marcus, I made a joke, which he kind of had a twinkle in his eye, and he offered a little something. I said to him, wow, wouldn't it be cool, even though he's the vilified person, to get the other side of the accusation of Sean? Mm-hmm. And I said, but it's, online, we see all these people at conventions that are asking the question at a convention, and they get on film him saying certain things. Yeah. And he goes, Royce, who do you think told these guys to film that stuff, Royce? and I said, oh, okay, good deal.
Yeah.
But it makes me wonder, do you only look at the footage the editor shows you, or have you seen hundreds of hours of raw
There,
material?
oh yeah, no, I got a hard drive of everything that they shot, and admittedly, there was a lot of stuff I just didn't have time to go through. But all the interviews I watched,
Yeah.
because they've got B-roll of I mean,
Yeah.
it's like the drive is the equivalent of the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark with the warehouse. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. But I watched enough to know, okay, we need this, we need that, we need, and I just gave just very, very, I wouldn't say it was overly specific, but just sort of the boundaries to the editor. I just said, focus on this. Don't worry about this so much. I don't need the nitty gritty technical stuff of this so much. I really don't want it to get bogged down here. Things like that. And then you just look at what the editor brings back. And the editor, Eric, is a great guy and is doing a wonderful job. And so, like I said, you definitely want to make sure you don't miss anything. But with a documentary, invariably, you're going to whittle it down to under 2 hours or whatever anyway. It's kind of like when all the footage I shot on Diary and Survival of the Dead. There's probably 40 hours of footage for each movie that I have in my archives, and the resulting documentaries reach 90 minutes. So it's like, you got to figure out what's the real important stuff. And that stuff's not going to get missed. So it's going to be very interesting. The next couple months are really going to be getting that thing in a fighting shape.
I've heard a million times from podcasters, yourself, the Dead Pit guys, Don May Jr., talking about the intent of the filmmaker when they go into it, and then how the film is received when people see it years later. Media Home Entertainment is the first copy I ever had of Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Sure.
That thing looked like shit.
Right.
But it looked like a grindhouse snuff movie.
Right.
And then that's the experience you get. And every time it gets cleaned up, it looks a little bit better, and now it's going to look amazing. And Hooper said, "I didn't shoot a movie to look like shit.
Right.
I shot a piece of art to look good." So, what has been your experience where now you get to speak to these filmmakers, so you get to hear their side of it? But has there ever been a movie where you saw it in a imperfect form and it shaped your view of it? That was the first time, and then when you saw the cleaned up version, it lost some of its charm?
I wouldn't say there's anything where it's lost its charm. It was just very different experience. Dawn of the Dead was one. Because I had watched Dawn of the Dead. That was the movie I watched. That and Creepshow were the movies I watched the most on when I was a kid. And I wore my old Thorny on my VHS of Dawn of the Dead the fuck out. And so I was very familiar with every dropout, with every nuance of that version. And so when I would see it on DVD and then laser, or whatever later on, there was a little part of me that was like, this is different, but I still love it. So I understand there's an attachment to how you see when you fall in love with what you saw when you first saw it, and you fall in love with it, warts and all. And so there's something about that will always be precious. Someone had forwarded me a link. This was not long ago, about 6 months ago. Somewhere online, there is an exact rip, a beautiful rip of the old Thorny MI VHS of Dawn of the Dead. And from beginning to end, with the warning and the dropouts and the black screen, everything. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cute. And I pushed play to watch a little bit of it. Before I knew it, the helicopter's taking off from the mall. I watched the whole damn thing. Because it was like, oh, it brought me back. But that was a pure nostalgia kick. So that's cool, and I can appreciate that for what it is. But my whole thing is always, what does the filmmaker want? What did they intend? How do they want it presented? And I go by that. But there have been films where the pristine quality of it kind of shakes you a little bit because you're just not used to seeing it that way. But that doesn't mean that I think that it's lesser or it's missing something as a result. I'll take the 4K of Night of the Living Dead over that shitty VHS I first had of it any day of the week. But I did see Night of the Living Dead on a shitty VHS for the first time. So there'll always be a little bit. That's where nostalgia goes bad. sometimes. I think for people, they get hung up on the time of their life in which they saw it, and they want to preserve that, and they don't want to let anything else in, and it can color their view of, you know, a newer version or something that looks a little bit different. Now, it's one thing if you look at something and it's wrong, it's been color timed wrong, or someone fucked something up. But, you know, look, I saw Suspiria on a Magnum VHS when it first got formally released here in the States. Loved that tape. Wore that tape out. But I'd throw mine in the garbage before I would ever consider not watching Synapse's 4K ever again. You know, give me a break. So I cannot think of a single one where I've ever watched a restored version of it and gone, oh God, give me the VHS any day. I love VHS. Don't get me wrong. Thank God for VHS. I got exposed to movies I never would have been able to get exposed to without it. It was there. It was available when I was a kid. I mean, thank God for it. But who are we fucking kidding? It was a problematic format from the very beginning. Films were not letterboxed. They didn't look very good. The masters were of subpar quality. If you're, you know, the tapes would wrinkle, jam, rip, tear. I mean, it was great for what it was, but we've moved on to bigger and better things. I get the nostalgia factor, but let's not kid ourselves. Okay? You know, it's like, it was what it was. And I was a child of VHS, so I know from what I speak. And I had more VHS tapes than anyone on my street had. You could have added up all the people on my street, all their tape collections together. It would have been a fourth of what I had when I was a kid. But even I, at some point, went, well, DVD's awesome. What the hell do I need with this anymore? You know, so it's, you know, that's, I could go on a rant forever about that. I mean, nothing wrong with doing VHS editions of some of these new movies as a nostalgic. I get that. That's fine. I like that. But when you start getting into VHS was better, it's purer. Fuck you. You know, it's no. Come on.
So in the DVD days, there was Divimax, you know, back, you know, and on the Divimax version of Day of the Dead, there was about a 30-40 minute documentary about the making of the movie.
Many
and
Days
then,
of Day of the Dead, I think, is what it was.
Yeah,
That was
and
that,
then
yeah.
when you have the the collector's edition, there's a full length documentary
Which
that
I
you
did. That was mine.
Yeah.
Yeah, The World's End.
What was the approach that you thought? Because it's a far superior documentary. It's a nice compliment to the first one. They're both excellent. What approach did you go in saying, you know, they told a story in that, but I have a story I can tell and expand it here?
Well, there was a reason for that. That one ran a little counter to what I've expressed about, hey, this other previous piece was really good. Why replicate what they've already done? Now, in the case of like Dawn of the Dead, you're not going to find a more thorough making of than what Perry Martin did with that.
Oh yeah.
You know, the Dead Walker. I think that's what it's called, the Dead Walker, or whatever. I can't remember the name of it. You know, I would never dream to try to replicate that.
That's amazing. You guys got he got Dario Argento to be interviewed.
Oh, everybody.
For it.
I mean,
everybody.
got practically everybody to do it. The Many Days of Day of the Dead, which is I think is what that one piece is called.
Yeah.
That was a problem piece in a way because it started shooting under one administration, Bill Lustig's administration, in terms of the production and the extras. And then when Bill left the company, well, Bill never formally, I don't think, worked for Anchor Bay. He was an independent contractor, I think. Then again, I don't know what his paperwork was, but he was in charge of, he would license titles, sub-license them to Anchor Bay, and he was in charge of all the physical production and mastering and all that stuff and shooting all the extras and everything. And then he left and formed Blue Underground, and then a gentleman by the name of Bo Alter took over internally, and then Perry Martin, who had worked with Bill, became the go-to guy for all the extras and everything. Now, Day of the Dead, they shot some interviews for that ahead of when Bill left. Bill left, and then they had to finish the Day of the Dead piece. Perry had to finish the Day of the Dead piece. So I think they shot a few additional things, but they couldn't do a whole lot more because we were running out of time or something happened. And so there was only so much that they could do. And they had to work with the interviews that had been shot previously. And I know Perry wasn't happy with some of them because he didn't feel like they went into enough depth on a couple things and so forth. And so the final piece that came out was good, but there were just a lot of people who weren't there, who weren't present for it. So when Day of the Dead rolled around for me, it's a George movie for one thing, so I got to be involved somehow. And it's one I desperately love and care about. Looking back at that piece, I thought, there are so many more people that are available now that I know that will participate in this that weren't around for that piece. Plus the fact that it was sort of a compromised one from the beginning. I think there's room to do a full, like, all the way feature-length doc on this. And so that's why that was done. And so we got everybody. I mean, I don't think there's one person we weren't able to get, which was Jarlath Conroy. That's the only person. Everybody else we got. And so that was a situation where I looked at it and went, there's so much more we can do now that I have the ability to get. And it was like, 2-3 times the amount of people that were involved in that piece. And so that was kind of the exception that proves the rule, I think, in some ways. But so that's why that happened, basically. Then Perry, I think, could offer a much more nuanced view of the things that happen on the Day of the Dead piece. But that's what I remember from back then. But that was 20 years ago now, so I may not be remembering things correctly, but I believe that's kind of what happened. I just remember that Day of the Dead was caught up in sort of that administrative change.
When you have projects in the pike and things haven't been announced and stuff, and then you get put on lots of different podcasts and shows, and somebody asks you a direct question about well, do you think this would be a good release if the company ever put it out? And later on, if you track back ahead of time and you watch, this movie gets released and Red Shirt is working on it. If you watch the old podcast of when someone directly asks you that question, when you're under proof lock and key, you have to study your face, because it's like look behind the eyes, because he's like, if I say a word, I'm going to have a bullseye on my head.
Yeah, that's the problem. Because I've gotten into big trouble leaking information before. I used to be really bad about that. I would just say, oh yeah, I'm working on this and this and this. And then the distributors are going to be saying, we haven't even closed the deal yet. You can't be talking about that yet. I mean, I almost got shit canned a couple times because of that. So it finally got bored into my brain. Shut up.
What was the biggest secret that has already been announced, but what is the biggest thing that you had to hold on to and act like you didn't even know shit? And then when it finally got released, you're like, oh yeah.
Oh God, there's so many of them. I don't know.
I think it was the 3 Vestron Silent Night Deadly Nights months in advance. People were like, it would be great if this and this.
Oh yeah, lots of people were talking about those.
However, if you watch the interview where somebody asked you, hypothetically, if you were to do those titles, what would you do?
Right.
And you look at the back of the box. Everything that's on the back of the box
I talked about was there.
But you said hypothetically.
Yeah, hypothetically, I was like, well, I would love to get a commentary with this person, and to, hey, if things work out, you never know. But there have been a few. I've gotten better at it, but there were a few times in the pretty distant past where someone would ask me a question like that on something I'm actively working on but can't talk about it, and there'd be that infinitesimal little moment where I'd be like, no, I don't know, it just, but there'd be that moment of panic where it's like, oh shit, no, I don't know what you're talking about, I don't know. But now it's just like I can lie with the best of them, and the Dead Pit guys always give me shit over that, because we did one chat once, and I was asked point blank about Dario Argento's Trauma, and I was literally, as they were asking that question, I had the interview with Tom Savini on my screen for it. And I was finishing it and getting ready to deliver it to Vinegar Syndrome, who hadn't announced the title yet. And, they're very secretive about when they announce titles for their, big, pushes and, around Christmas and stuff like that. So it wasn't up for me to say anything about it. And so I had to lie right to their face, saying, I don't know, that'd be a great title to do. I hope it works out someday. Yet if they could have zoomed in on my glasses, they could have said, that's Savini talking about. Because I had the trauma heads in the interview and everything. So it was like, I had to lie. And they gave me some shit over it. But it's like, guys, I'm sorry. It's like, it's the nature of the business. It's like, I'd rather be in trouble with you than in trouble with the people who write the checks. So No offense, but that's just the way it's going to be. But if I can talk about it, I certainly will. But I can't be in I can't be in a position where I can even hint at it because it's a
Oh, yeah.
relatively small pond out there. They're going to figure out. It's like, well, it's one of these 5 companies that's doing it. So it's like, okay, and then it just becomes a big thing and steamrolls out of control. So my
Now,
whole thing is,
sooner
shut
or
up.
later, old Freddy Krueger is going to get a nice new
Oh
box set.
God.
Yeah, yeah.
They are convinced that I am working on a new Nightmare on Elm Street box set for Scream Factory, and nothing I say will ever convince them otherwise. All I can tell you is I am not. I have no knowledge of anything having to do with Nightmare on Elm Street coming out from anybody. So, I don't really work with Scream Factory that much anymore. So, I would be the last person they'd probably tell, even if they were doing it. And I mean, I know they've asked about those titles because they have a good relationship with Warner Brothers. So those were probably the first titles they asked about. But, who knows? But I swear to God, I am not lying. At this point, honestly, I would just come out and say I'm working on it just to shut people up. If it was true, I wouldn't even care if Screen Factory had a problem with it or not. But I'm not because I don't know of any plans. If anybody's working on it, that's no fucking idea. And you can absolutely take that to the bank. And now that I've said that, it's going to get announced tomorrow, and I'm going to look like a schmuck. But I'm still not working on it, even if it does. So I have no knowledge of anything.
When they did the Scream Factory did the box set for the Friday 13th movies, and there was already like, well, what more can you do besides Crystal Lake Memories?
Right.
And yet they found a way to get Steve Miner to do an interview he never did before. And
yeah, Steve's been. I've worked with Steve a few times. He came out. He did House for me, and then he also did Warlock as well. So he started to thaw out a little bit on terms of doing interviews and stuff like that. And so it was great that they were able to do that. And then they got that uncut footage, too, which was amazing. I was stunned by how violent that stuff. Because sometimes you hear about this cut footage, and then you finally get to see it, and you're like, "That's it? That's all that was cut? Really? That's what we've been salivating over for 30 years? That's it?" But then the part 2 stuff was like, God damn, that was okay. Like they really did trim some stuff out of this.
It's amazing that they found that footage. I mean, one day they're going to find the lost footage of Chainsaw 2.
Oh, that's my white whale, man. Because I mean, we have some of it, obviously, and it's been on several Blu-rays.
No, I'm talking about Hooper, Dennis Hopper drinking the mezcal and going crazy, and
the chainsaws coming through the walls in his hotel and shit like that. And there's other material apparently too that was shot that was some more character stuff. Who knows if that stuff? I mean, at this point, we've unturned over so many rocks. I just don't know where it could be. But if anything if experience has taught me anything, you never know. You just never fucking know.
I want to know in the movie where they actually would have explained that Vernita is actually Lefty's daughter.
I don't know where that would have happened. That's the thing I wonder too, because it's like there's very little downtime. It's not like she would have discovered this or figured this out underground at the Sawyer's lair. There's no way for it. And so it would have had to have happened before she went there and before the massacre at the radio station. But there doesn't seem, I don't know. And so I wonder if some of that material was in the script and they just never bothered to shoot it.
Yeah.
But then Caroline does have memories of some of that material. But like the Dennis Hopper scene, I've had a couple people say, I don't think we shot that. It's like, no, you definitely shot some of it.
It's in the trailer. Yeah.
In the TV spot.
Yeah.
There's a shot of Dennis Hopper throwing open the closet doors with a gun and backing off really quick. And that scene would have happened right before Stretch knocks on the door. Because that would also explain when Dennis Hopper opens the door,
he looks like shit.
He's like this. Because he's just had that experience. So that's when that would have. So it was clearly shot. But, who knows? The fact that it wasn't even in the work print that we've had access to all these years tells me that it was probably cut very, very early on.
There was a theater locally in town. They have a 35 millimeter projector, and they also have digital DCP, and they can show Blu-rays too. And they advertised Chainsaw 1 and 2, the double feature, the Hooper double feature, and first they advertised they were going to show it in 35 millimeter each.
Mhm.
And then right before the movie starts, they announced to us that one of the projectors, because they just flip it on the
Mhm.
cigarette burn and they can just keep going. They announced one of the projectors was down. So they
Mhm.
said, well, we're going to have to thread the next projector every 11 minutes. So
Mhm.
every 11 minutes, every reel change, there's going to be a minute or so of nothing. And everybody was like, oh my God. So they did that for the first movie. And the first movie is not that long.
No.
So they only had to do it a couple of times or like 7, 8 times. By the time they were done with that, they said, don't worry, we have the Blu-ray of part 2. We won't have to do that because the movie's 30 minutes longer.
Uh,
Well, they couldn't get the Blu-ray to start.
oh,
So they were like, and we're going to be showing the 35 millimeter version. Everybody was like, oh God. No, but I never saw part 2 in the theater or part 1. And so watching those two scratchy prints
yeah.
and hearing it just in the ambiance of the theater and the acoustics, it was a much different experience
Oh yeah.
seeing it that way.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And because it's a scratchy print and it's an old, theater that you almost could, what is it? What is it? They sell like Wonka's lickable wallpaper, whatever.
Right. You
You
can
could
almost
almost,
taste the theater. It's
yeah,
almost
yeah.
like,
You watch
yeah.
the movie and you're like, I could almost feel that if a movie like this was played at a hardtop theater in Times
Hmm.
Square at a gritty grindhouse theater, so
Oh
you could
yeah.
smell the cigarette smoke when you
Oh
watch the
yeah.
movie.
A theater experience can really color your impression of a movie. I mean, it's the crowd, the smells, the ambiance of the theater, the print conditions. I mean, all that stuff could contribute so much to it. A lot of movies I saw so many more movies in the theater back in the 80s and 90s than I have in the years since. And I was just reminiscing about our art house theater. When I lived in Charlotte, we had an art house theater called the Manor Theater, and it just closed down not too long ago. It was a little two-screen house, and they would play all the movies that the other theaters were never going to take. And so it was all the art house movies that would play for a week, maybe 2 weeks. And the theater had terrible parking. It was a little strip shopping center. Parking was atrocious. You could never park anywhere near the fucking place. The theaters were old. The seats were not particularly comfortable. The sound was okay. The picture was okay. The bathrooms were upstairs. They weren't any downstairs. And the whole place, even with all the sights and smells, everything, the whole place always just vaguely, not overly so, but just vaguely when you would walk in for a couple of, maybe 30 seconds, place always had a little bit of hint of urine in the air because the plumbing there was not great. So it was always just there, and then you'd become nose blind to it and move on with your life. But I love that place. I mean, I got to see movies there I wouldn't have been able to see anywhere else. And I was so sad when it closed down recently. But another part of me was just like, well, I mean, from a technical standpoint, it wasn't the greatest place in the world, but I wouldn't trade that. I would have wished there had been some sort of way to keep it open. Because thank God for it. I mean, again, I wouldn't have been able to see half the movies I loved in the 90s because of that place. But again, I'll have memories of the prints breaking or something happening or cigarette burns and scratch. I mean, just that stuff can really color your impression of a movie, certainly, But and that's fine. That's cool. There's no wrong or right. If you enjoy a movie a certain way, be damned with what anyone else says. Enjoy it. That's fine. I'm not here to tell you you're wrong. I get a little bit tired of some people letting nostalgia overwhelm their good sense to some degree. But at the end of the day, it's just my opinion. So fuck it. If you don't agree with me, who cares what I have to say?
Well, what has been your most rewarding part of the fact that you've been able to curate and document
Mm.
the films that you have and the careers of some of the specific filmmakers you've done, like several movies for lots of people?
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten to George. I don't know how many I've done with George and Fred Decker. I've done DVD editions of all three of the movies he's directed. Fred's a great friend, and I was such a privilege to get to work with him. And Tom Savini, I think I've interviewed Tom more than anybody else I've ever interviewed. I mean, it's just for me, like I said, it's about documenting the creative processes of these incredibly ambitious people who wanted to express themselves artistically, you know, from the directors to the producers to the special effects artists to the actors, because it's important to document. You know, you can, is a movie like Nail Gun Massacre art? I would argue it is. Is it great art? That's up for debate. But it was an artistic expression, by God, and it's important to document how that happened, because it could prove to be an inspiration to somebody else. It could show to somebody else, well, if they could do it, I can do it, you know? And I it's a privilege to me to be able to, that, you know, the work that I do shows what these people did, what they were going through in their lives at the time, and how these movies have had an afterlife that they sometimes didn't expect. And what's interesting is that sometimes the afterlife that the movie has had, they've loved that and they're very happy about it, but it hasn't healed the wounds of the fact that the movie didn't do well when it first came out. You know, Fred Decker, it still bothers him that the Monster Squad bombed. To this day, it's still a hurtful thing for him. You know, it's not like he sits around all day like, oh, I can't believe, but it's still something where it's just like, that had a huge impact on his career. And it was a movie that he poured his heart and soul into. And it's always difficult when you put everything you have into something and the public at large just goes, meh. You know, that has to feel bad. And not to mention the fact that it impacts your ability to get the next thing going. So, but at the same time, he can't help but love the fact that people love it now. So it's weird, but it's the same thing. One thing does not necessarily heal the other, but it's still a wonderful thing. You know, it's like when anyone ever talks to Steven Spielberg, he's the first person to say the fact that Jaws had the success that it had is amazing to me, and I'm so grateful for it, because it made my career. You know, it gave me the opportunity to do whatever I've wanted ever since. You know, a few setbacks here and there, but without Jaws, I don't have the career that I had. And I'm thrilled with the reaction. You know, people love that movie. Yet making it was the most terrifying, horrifying experience of my life. And I would never want to go through that again with a gun to my head. So the two things, one doesn't necessarily salve the other, you know? And so it's interesting when you come across that, when you talk to some of these people. It's like, and sometimes people are kind of bitter about it still to this day. It's like, yeah, it's nice that people like it now, but where the hell were they 30 years ago?
The metaphor in the movie is we need a bigger boat, and the documentary on the disc also says for Jaws, the shark is working or still working. If the shark had worked the way he wanted, and he was able, and he made a Val Lewton movie or some crazy monster movie, he would have had no career.
No, it wouldn't have worked. I mean,
that movie, not working, made him have a better film.
Yeah, it absolutely did. And he'd be the first one to admit that. You know, he'd be the first one to say, it forced me to do other things. So I can't show the shark, so how do I suggest it being there without it actually being there? And then, guess who comes in and saves the whole fucking movie?
John Williams.
Hell
yeah.
With
the amazing music.
That's it. I mean, you know, I remember him saying something along the effects. I was like, we showed the movie and previewed the movie without his score, and it was okay. And it wasn't great. But then the score came in and suddenly everything worked.
And I can't go in the water still.
Well, no, I mean, people, I'm the same way. So it's like, and it's fascinating to me when like one of the projects I did early on was Faces of Death for MPI, or it's Gorgon Video technically. Now I had no love for Faces of Death. You know, it was one of those things as a kid. It's like, have you seen Faces of Death? It's all real. People dying on camera. Then you watch it and you're like, it's a bunch of bullshit. And, you know, maybe some of it's real, but a lot of this stuff is fun. I didn't have much respect for it. But when I got to produce the extras for the Blu-ray and I listened to the director talk about how that came together and the editing tricks they used and everything, I mean, I still don't like watching it, but I have an enormous amount of respect for the craft that went into it. It was just like, wow, I wouldn't have. It's like, this part of the scene is real, this middle part is fake, and then it's real again, and then it's fake again. It's like you blended all this stuff amazingly well. And so you learn just about, okay, they weren't making high art, and they knew they were making something kind of scurrilous, but at the same time, they put a lot of craft into this. And so it's turned me around on some movies that previously I was just kind of like, I don't really like this that much. But then you watch it again with the new eyes and a new appreciation for the effort that went into it, and the passage of time helps sometimes. And you're just like, oh wow, okay, I didn't like Toby Hooper's The Mangler. I saw that in the theater, didn't like it at all. But now I watch it and go, oh, this movie is deliberately funny. Why was I taking it so seriously? Toby knew that this was, this movie about a killer laundry press, for Christ's sakes. Why was I being so serious about this when clearly he wasn't? It's just, those are the real treats when you walk away as a filmmaker surprised and enlightened by things. You're going, oh, I had, going into this, I had no idea about all this stuff that went into this movie. And now I watch it and I see things completely differently. That's a real pleasure. And that's happened more times than I can probably count.
One filmmaker I remember you talking about, I think on the Dead Pit show, was Danny Steinmann, and you got to talk to him. He had done The Unseen, but then they changed the name, like an Alan Smithy kind of thing, and then he had done Savage Streets, and then Friday 13th 5, and he was going to have more things to do, like Last House on the Left 2. Talk about your memories of the late Danny Steinmann.
Danny was someone I had been curious about my whole life, because I love Friday 5 even when I first saw it. It's a weird ass fucking movie, and it has its own weird twisted.
It is so sleazy
spirit, and these really memorable over the top characters and ripe as hell dialogue and performances. But I love it, and I've always defended that movie because it's like people are always like, well, it's not really Jason. Isn't it really Jason? It's a 6-foot fucking guy in a hockey mask with a machete. It's close enough. Okay. Yeah. Come on. Let's not get crazy here. And so I've always loved, and Danny Steinmann was kind of a mystery man because he disappeared after that. I remember seeing a VHS it was the VHS for Last House on the Left, the unrated version. There was a black and white text trailer promising Last House on the Left 2 from the director of Friday the 13th Part 5. And it never happened. And I never knew, and of course this is way before the internet, no idea what the hell happened or why didn't this transpire. And he never directed a movie again. And then, so he was always like, who is this Danny Steinmann? And there was rumors he had done porn before too. It was like, what?
High Rise, yeah.
Yeah. But I didn't even know what that movie was. I just heard rumors he did porn before. And I knew about Savage Streets, and then I found out later about that he was actually his name on The Unseen. And then it was just like, okay. Then a company called BCI, which was run at that time by Clifford McMillan, worked on, and he later joined Shout Factory. He did Savage Streets. And I said, okay, I want to do Savage Streets if for no other reason I want to find Danny Steinmann. Because I want to talk to this man. And a friend of mine, Sean Clark, who does Horror's Hallowed Grounds and reps a lot of, he had contacted Danny. He had found Danny, I think, somehow, and was going to have him at a show or something. And I got his contact info for him, and he was living in Wilmington, Delaware at the time. And I called up Danny. I just cold called him and said, my name is Michael Felsher. We're doing this release of Savage Streets. Could I come to you in person and do a commentary with you? And he was just like, really? Why? He couldn't, from Danny's perspective, he didn't think anyone remembered any of the movies he did. He was just like, he was just like, well, all right, whatever. And I went to his apartment, and I brought a whole bunch of posters and stuff for him to sign, because I don't know if I'll ever see this man again. And we did the commentary for Savage Streets, and by the end of it, he and I were kind of friends. And I ended up bringing him to 2 conventions, one Cinema Wasteland, and the other was what was it? I can't remember the other name. Fright Night Film Fest in Kentucky, I think. And he just couldn't believe people cared about his movies. He had separated him. He had gotten injured late in life and gotten a serious injury that took him out. It took him years to recover, and he never fully was able to work again after that. And he had a lot of close calls with projects happening, but eventually, the industry just kind of passed him by. And he just assumed that no one remembered any of the movies he did. And I loved it. He was so much fun to talk with. And we ended up doing a live midnight commentary at Cinema Wasteland. It was myself, Danny, and Art Edinger from Ultraviolet Magazine. and we did a live commentary at midnight on Saturday night for Friday 5 with an increasingly drunk crowd. That was the best time I think I've ever had in my life. Danny got into it. He's just like, after a while, because we're making fun of the movie, and at some point we're like, Danny, is this okay? He's like, are you kidding? I'm having a blast. Keep going. Keep going. And Danny was, he was a very eccentric man, certainly someone who I can see would rub people the wrong way. You know, there were a lot of people that worked with him who didn't like him very much, and sometimes with good cause. And Danny would be the first person to say, yeah, you know, I was who I was. But I'm so privileged that I got the chance to meet him, and that I got to be part of exposing him to people that loved his work. And really, and he got to see that, oh, I did stuff, people did care. People do remember what I did. And I think that really just threw him. He had completely written off that part of his life completely. And kind of lost touch with him a little bit in the last year or so of his life, and I heard he passed away, and I felt really bad about that. Because we did a couple conventions. I always wanted to bring him back to another convention, but it never really seemed to work out. And but it was great. I was really happy to have known him for the brief time I did, and I'm just glad that he got to see. It had to have been really nice for him to see, oh, I will be remembered by somebody. You know, somebody did enjoy what I did. Even if it's not Shakespeare, fine. But yeah. My favorite memory of Danny is I'm sitting next to him at Cinema Wasteland at his table, and this woman walked by in a very revealing costume, which showed off her rear end very nicely, let's just say. And Danny, we both looked, and Danny looked at her, he turned back, and he looked at me and said, man, Michael, seeing that makes me wish I was still making movies. I'm just like, okay, man. You know, so I mean, but then again, you know, if you talk to some of the people he worked with on Friday 5, you know, he could rub people the wrong way. And, you know, I'm not here to say that Danny was a saint by any stretch, and he would have been the first person to admit he wasn't either. So,
oh yeah, the editor on the film said that the B-roll for some scenes in the background of him coaching the scenes or directing the scenes, it was like he was directing his old days, you know, his older films.
yeah.
Yeah, he was getting very specific about how he wanted people to do the love
Yeah.
scenes and the
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, he rubbed people on. You know, Melanie Kinnaman doesn't have a lot of nice things to say about him. But at the same time, it's just like, well, you know, I'm not here to deny anybody else their experience. What my experience was very positive. And, you know, who you are in the waning years of your life invariably is going to be very different than who you were 30, 40 years before. And so I got to know him at a certain time of his life. Had I known him back when he was making movies, it would have been very difficult. Very different, maybe. I don't know. What was interesting, though, was I finally got to see High Rise, which I learned was the porno he had directed before all the other movies.
Where did you see it? How do you see it?
It came out on a company had released it on DVD. I think one of a descendant of the company that actually made the movie still owned the rights to it, and they put it out on DVD. And watching it was hilarious. It's the sweetest, nicest porno you've ever seen. It's almost wholesome, really. It's like hippie flower children and bright colors, and everyone's having fun fucking. There's no, like, I mean, it's the least sleazy porno that I've ever seen. And it's like he had to go legit to get sleazy, which was...
It's like
yeah.
in the documentary, the Crystal Lake Memories, they show clips of the case of the Smiling Stiffs, you know, the Cunningham C minor movie. It's like, but where are they finding this footage?
Right.
Where are they getting this footage to show it in their documentaries?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you never know where some of the stuff's going to turn up. But that was the big thing that because I figured it's like, oh, man, Danny Steinmann porno, this thing's going to be fucking, you know, just, you know, because, I mean, some of the stuff in Savage Streets alone is like, oh, my God.
Oh, yeah.
But you watch this nicest, sweetest goddamn thing. It's like, all right, didn't see that coming. That was a surprise. But yeah.
According to IMDb and other, you know, Googling it, don't remember what his first name was. Was it Abe Snake? Was Wes Craven went under a pseudonym to
Yeah.
direct a porno?
Yeah, and Wes appears in one too. I don't, as not as an active participant,
Right.
but he's yeah. So him and Sean did a lot of adult stuff. Or
I guess that's how you get started. I mean, Dee Wallace started in porn. Sly Stallone was in a porn. I
Bill
mean,
Lustig directed porn back in the. I mean, a lot of guys did, because it was back then. You shot stuff. They were films. They were actual films, and so they would play theaters. They sometimes porno films would get better distribution than a lot of regular independent movies would.
and I bet you that since they were shooting on film, and back then they were thinking they were Godard or Fellini, they were trying to actually shoot it well and light it well and make films that they were erotic, but they still were done with craft.
Oh yeah, yeah, and
kind of like in Boogie Nights, Burt Reynolds' character.
Yeah, Boogie Nights. I think covered that transition to video very accurately. It kind of cheapened everything.
I think they deny it. Burt Reynolds and P.T. Anderson deny that Burt Reynolds is playing. Oh crap! How to pronounce his name? He's the guy that made Deep Throat.
Oh,
the way his gray of his hair and his beard and
right.
and the coat, everything about the way he looks is identical to that guy.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that was a deliberate reference. I mean, there's the scene with Alfred Molina and everything there's a lot of references to John Holmes.
Yeah,
the big massacre that happened with him, the incident, the crime, what was it, the Wonderland crime, scene or whatever they called it. So I mean, there's a lot of inside references on that film, but yeah, it was just so weird when I finally got to see. I hear myself psyched up on High Rise. I was like, okay, this is gonna be this is gonna be interesting. Oh my God, this is almost like a goddamn Disney movie, So it was really funny. Yeah.
You've chronicled other people's careers and made a career out of it yourself. So you are a filmmaker, and one of these days someone's going to make a movie about you. But Red Shirt Pictures branched off to self-release After Effects. And there's more coming. So talk about the need to and the situation of how that happened, of releasing the documentaries you had the rights to under your own label.
Well, it's a matter of, I don't want to just re-release stuff I've already done, but there are a few that, like After Effects, I was going to do a longer version of it. So I thought, okay, so it's not just rehashing the exact same thing that people have already bought before. And there'll be a couple more like that. There will be expanded versions of things coming up. It's just finding the time to work on them is hard, because you got to pay the bills, keep the lights on, so you got to do work for other people.
Does it have to be a film that was released with a rights situation where you maintain the rights to the documentary, so you can do that, like Just Desserts?
Yeah, and Just Dessert. I mean, it doesn't happen very often, but there are things that I do own outright. But Just Desserts was a situation where the company I did it for, which was Universal UK, they only had the rights to Creepshow in the UK. They didn't own it anywhere else in the world. And they weren't going to be able to pay me a lot of money to do it. So I negotiated the deal with them. It's like, oh, you own it for the UK, but I own it for everywhere else. And I'll do it, and I'll deliver a full-length documentary for you, plus a commentary track, plus this other stuff for the money that you can afford to pay me. And they were like, okay. And so that was kind of a unique situation. Whereas a lot of other stuff is work for hire, and that they own it. After Effects I owned, but then Walking After Midnight, the Survival of the Dead doc, I own that. The Diary of the Dead documentary, I own that. Because again, it was a situation where they couldn't really pay me anything to go up there, so I'm going to own the thing that I'm done with, and I get to do with it as I see fit.
The Night of the Living Dead one for the fire, will that actually see the light of day, the correct version of that?
I hope so. We talked about it a couple years ago about revisiting that, but I think there's still some rights issues that need to be resolved. It's kind of complicated with that one, but I still have all the original files. I'd have to I mean, the intended version of it was never close to really being finished. It was just sort of a rough assembly. Was
it very different than the way that it appears now? Because the way it appears now is very jarring and strange.
It was rushed. There's a lot of stuff that happened with that. It was never color corrected. It was rushed over the course of like 3 days and cobbled together. It, and some of that's my fault. I had some poor time management skills back then. Some of it was the distributor's fault because originally it was going to be a 2 disc set, which meant the documentary could be as long as it needed to. And then literally at the 0 hour, they told me, oh, by the way, we're squeezing this all into 1 disc, so it can't be any longer than 70 minutes. And I have a 2.5 hour assembly, which was probably going to get whittled down to under 2 hours, but still it's like, oh shit, what am I supposed to do? So there were a lot of factors. And it wasn't originally going to be divided up the way that it was. It was, yeah, it would be a completely, in fact, we could pretty much just slap a new name on it. It would be such a completely different documentary. But hopefully someday that'll get worked out, because that was a painful experience for pretty much everyone involved.
So you mentioned rights. You get a disc like Candyman, the UK Arrow release. It has everything that's on the American release except the Clive Barker interview.
Right, that was done exclusively for them.
So yeah, so how does that work when something can only be on one release and it manages to not be ported over? Like when Funhouse came out recently, it didn't have that interview with Hooper. It had the commentary, but it didn't have the interview.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. Well, that's a situation where it has to be worked out between the companies that are releasing the movie and the other company that owns the extras. I'm usually never involved in that because they don't have to involve me. So sometimes they're willing to meet the price, other times they're not. And
I recently bought a 5-disc set of the John Hughes collection for Paramount, and had Pretty in Pink and Ferris Bueller and all these things.
Planes, Trains, and Automobiles and all that.
Yeah, and then Some Kind of Wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
And She's Having a Baby.
She's having a baby.
And I had them on DVD, and then I got this box set. Some of the movies had the exact same extras from the DVD.
Mm-hmm.
For Pretty in Pink, they had none of the interviews with Meyer Ringwald. They had none of these original documentaries. They just had these slapped together new interviews they did of just Howie Deutsch. And that's it. And I'm like, well, that's very arbitrary. That everything in the box set they're using, but then they choose not to use this.
Yeah, and I don't know why that happens. Sometimes I think they just forget. And they're just like, oh, we forgot to. I honestly think that happens sometimes. But then there may be a situation where those features were actually licensed out from somebody else. And so they weren't able to renew that for some reason, or maybe there were music rights issues that have since come up. Who knows? Yeah. I mean, it could be any number of reasons why. Or they just felt, let's only include the new stuff. Let's not put the old stuff on. Yeah. I mean, those are kind of decisions that are made way past my pay grade a lot of the times.
So what is anything that has recently been announced but maybe hasn't gotten a lot of traction? What is something else that's coming out for Red Shirt on Vestron or one of the other labels that you can plug so people know about?
Well, the dentist collection's coming up, I think, very soon, either this week or next week.
Yeah, I already pre-ordered my copy of that.
Yeah,
it's great. It's great that you got Corbin Burnson for that.
Oh yeah, and that came very close to the end. He wanted to do it, but he's extremely busy. He's like flying all around the world. I mean, he's always in demand. So it was just a matter of, where are you that we can like nail you down for an hour? And we finally got him in Atlanta. My friend Daniel Griffith, who runs Ballyhoo, he went down and filmed that interview for me, and he was great. But you got to get him. I mean, it's just like, how can I release the dentist without the dentist in it?
You have to get Julian Sands for the Warlock.
Right.
You can't get Terry O'Quinn. You can't get him for the Stepfather, but
you can't get him for anything. He doesn't do interviews very often at all. But it always cracks me up. It's not that you don't want to get these people. It's just sometimes you can't, because you either can't get a hold of them or they just say no. I remember there was one review or one mention in the forum post somewhere about the Stepfather release. So the interviews on that thing were good, but I can't believe they didn't ask Terry O'Quinn. It's like, right. It never occurred to me to ask Terry O'Quinn to do an interview. It's like, whoopsie.
I remember an interview with Peter Bracke where he said that he was doing interviews for the book Crystal Lake Memories. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember if it was him or he had someone else do it for him, but they went on set of Hollow Man, and they were
For
asking
Kevin Bacon. Yeah.
Kevin Bacon a bunch of questions, and right at the end, they just kind of threw a curveball and asked him a couple of Friday 13th ones, and he was on the spot, so he just answered them. It was
Mhm.
probably the only time he's ever talked about the movie in print or anything. Every once in a while, if he's on a podcast, someone will bring it up and then he'll talk about it. Or if
Right,
he's on a
right.
Tonight Show or something, people will talk about it. But it's weird that um, you can kind of like put him in a corner and get him to talk about it, and he'll kind of, "Oh, okay, I'll answer
Oh yeah,
questions."
I don't. I've seen interviews where he talks freely about it. He did a thing for GQ where he talked about all his other, and he talked about Friday the 13th quite a bit.
But then why couldn't they get him for any of the documentaries then?
It's a matter sometimes of who is between you and them. That's what often happens. Sometimes if you have a direct line into somebody, they're fine with it. I encountered this on Texas Chainsaw Massacre: Next Generation in terms of McConaughey and Zellweger. Both of them have spoken about that movie in interviews plenty of times and have no issues with that movie at all. I mean, neither one of them think it's the best film they've ever done or anything, but it was a big part in a movie back when they were first starting out. They had some good memories of it. Neither one of them has any complex about that movie whatsoever. But the people around them to this day still are terrified of that movie getting mentioned. To the point where I couldn't even use clips of them from the movie in the other featurettes I was doing. That's how bad it was.
That's crazy, because you think when they sign the contracts that it allows them to be used in promotional materials.
Well, but see, the problem happened. This was kind of a weird situation when that movie was coming out. Finally, it was right when
Jerry Maguire
and
Time to Kill.
Were both getting ready to hit, which was going to launch these guys into superstardom. So their agents and their managers and their publicists and all the people around them were terrified of this Chainsaw movie coming out and fucking all that up. So they browbeat the studio into burying it, and the studio is still gun shy about it today.
I like the movie.
It's okay. I mean, what I like about the movie is that it's got its own personality.
It's shot in Texas.
Shot in Texas, and I like the performances very much. I think McConaughey and Zellweger are terrific. Everybody in that movie is actually quite good. It gets weird towards the end, and the whole thing about the government and whatever. It's like, well, I don't what, but it's certainly better than its reputation has portrayed it as.
So you were on the commentary of that with Kim Henkel. You also worked on the Legion cut of Exorcist 3. You know, so what's it like working on the commentaries and moderating where you're watching the version of the movie that the director prefers, and then you may have an opinion whether that it is better or the theatrical is better. Like,
it's that's interesting. That hasn't happened too often. The William Peter Blatty commentary kind of was really not a commentary. It was an audio interview that I did with him at his house at his desk.
Yeah,
because he had been very reluctant to do any more interviews. He was getting on in years at that point. He was in his late 80s, I think. And it turns out he died 6 months later. And he just didn't want to do interviews anymore. He was done with it. And I convinced him. I said, please, for Exorcist 3, this is those movies coming out party finally. After all these years, it's finally getting the respect that it deserves, because I love that movie. I've loved it since I saw it in 1990 at the theater. I have been a big proponent of that movie, so much so that when Shout Factory made the deal with Morgan Creek to start doing movies, I said, you're going after Exorcist 3. I know you're going after that one. If you give that to anyone else, I will burn your damn building down. I said, that one goes to me. I don't give a shit what other one you can, but I'm doing Exorcist 3. That's just all that's all there is to it. And but I was in communication with Blatty. He said, no. Finally, at the 11th hour, I said, how about we do this? I come to you with an audio recorder, no lights, no camera, no bullshit, no crew, and we just talk for as long as you want to talk about Exorcist 3, and then when you're done, I turn the recorder off and I leave. And he came back and said, all right. So I went to his house, and we sat there, and as it turns out, after editing out a couple of breaks and everything, the runtime of the interview fit exactly the length of the Legion cut of Exorcist, just by complete coincidence. And so it was like, okay. So we didn't really watch the Legion cut. which in a way I'm kind of glad we didn't, because I don't like the Legion cut as much as the theatrical cut. I saw what he was going for, but this is rare for me to say this, but I agreed with the studio. The movie doesn't have an ending. It's just, he walks in and shoots him, and boom, the movie goes like, okay.
We have another movie like Nightbreed finally got its restored version.
Yeah.
But it's nice that they actually put both versions on there.
And that was a good thing, because you got to make sure you do that, especially in a situation where they're radically different like that. You gotta make sure, because warts and all, the theatrical version of Nightbreed is the one that people did fall in love with originally.
That version of that movie, and like the two versions of that movie, and the two versions of Lord of Illusions.
Oh sure, yeah.
Depending on which version of the movie you watch, you get a completely different experience.
If you watch
the theatrical version of Lord of the Illusions, it's a horror movie.
Right.
If you watch the longer version
mystery.
with all the detective work, the longer stuff, Scott Bakula gets to unsolve a mystery.
Right.
Nightbreed, the extra scenes with Cronenberg as the killer.
It's a
slasher movie.
Yeah.
But then the other version's about Midian and about all the monsters, and then
it becomes a monster movie. It actually becomes a monster epic, a fantasy film. And I'll never forget the advert, because Nightbreed was chronicled in Fangoria for months before it came out, because this was going to be the next big thing. It was a Clive Barker, his next film after Hellraiser. It's a monster movie. Look at all those monsters. And then you see the first poster and the commercial for it, and you're like, so according to this is about a masked killer who goes around killing families. There's no, where did all the monsters go? And then people go to the movie and it was like, what the hell is this? It was like, what the fuck? It was really, but it was such an odd, ineffective ad campaign for that movie. Because the original theatrical poster was just a black and white shot of two horrified eyes. And that was it. I was like, what the fuck does this have to do?
It's like the poster for the Highlander. It doesn't tell you shit. It's just this weird image, tells you nothing.
No. And sometimes it's like, I like a soft sell as much as the next guy, but you gotta intrigue me to some degree. You gotta make me wonder, what is this movie about? Make me want to find out more, instead of just going, what the fuck is this?
I like that the different releases that come out, that there's the slipcase is the new art, but then you can flip it around.
I like that too.
It's nice because it choose your own adventure. You can have which one you want on your shelf, and
that's something I'm very fond of as well. A lot of companies do that now, and I'm not as hung up on that as a lot of other people. I mean, I like having the option, but I also know things going to sit on my shelf 99.5% of the time anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to see it. But there are times where I've disliked the new artwork so much that it's like, I don't even want to look at this fucking thing. Get it off my cover.
And you definitely don't want the, even though I like the movie Scream, you don't want the Photoshop cover of just heads.
No, that was such a big trend in the 90s that was just like, how many heads can we fit on this thing?
Do you think that the art of the Drew Struzan kind of thing of the drawn art and the graphic art on the cover of a poster of a movie, like the Indiana Jones, the Star Wars movies, those kinds of things, do you think that's a dying art?
No, I don't. I think that there'll always be appeal for that. And I like, for example, and one thing that I've been very happy about that we've done over at Vestron is that they've let me hire artists to do illustrated art for a lot of their covers in the last few years. Like The Dentist has great art, and Silent Night Deadly Connection has great. Devin Whitehead did those, and Justin Osborne's done some ones for us, and Matthew Therian have done just really great pieces of art for these things that are illustrated covers that I love. And it's like, because I don't want to just do a photo collage and shit like that. And, so we're going to keep doing that going forward. There was a weird edict that happened during Anchor Bay. I was just thinking of this the other day. Somehow the sales department got some feedback from either Walmart or one of the big vendors that some titles hadn't sold, and they determined that the reason these titles hadn't sold is because they had illustrated covers. So suddenly that became an edict. No more illustrated covers going forward. And we're all like, what? It's like, no more illustrated covers. No more. People don't like that. We're like, what are you basing that on? Because these two small titles didn't do well? So we had to, there were several titles that got truly awful DVD covers because we couldn't use any illustrations. And the artists that did them in-house felt terrible about it. It's like, I'm being given, like, I'm supposed to be designing a cover, and they're giving me 2 crayons and a magic marker to design it with, basically. It's like I'm not being allowed to, and so and of course everyone had to have a say in it, so it ended up being a micromanaged piece of shit that didn't please anybody. And as a result, we got some really awful covers that came down. It's like I'll still see those DVDs out and about at conventions sometimes, and I'll walk by and go, oh God, you know. But there was that edict that came out, no illustrated covers, and I just wanted to slap them. It's like, the fuck is wrong? That doesn't know what, you know. So, and that led to some, like, Cut and Run was the one that always bothered me. It's like that has a piece of art with Michael Berryman with the machete, and you know, that's just fucking great. That just tells you everything you need to know about that movie. But we had to use some we had 3 photos. We had to use them, and it looked like a bad episode of Miami Vice. And it was just like, what the fuck? And it bombed. Big surprise. You know, it's just, ugh. That was a period of my time there where it was just like, oh, you guys have lost the thread here, you know.
So there's lots of the Chainsaw movies are getting, you know, DVD love, Blu-ray love, now 4K love. So the first movie is coming out, and it has even the family portrait, you know, and it's got, you know, even that's on there. And part 2 has got
got the 4K, yeah.
And it has the outtakes from Electric Boogaloo, you know, to actually show the Hooper interview. Yeah. Because he wasn't in the documentary because he was elsewhere doing stuff.
No, yeah, well, Toby wasn't in the documentary because his agent at the time was playing hardball. This wasn't Toby's fault. I asked him, I said, can you, Toby, do an interview for this? Well, Toby doesn't get out of bed for anything less than $10,000. And I'm like, I don't even have $10,000 to do this whole project, let alone pay anyone to show up. And I'm like, and I know it's Toby, but I was like, I'm sorry, I can't do anything. He's like, well, sorry. And then I don't remember what ended up happening, but I think I may have asked David Gregory to help. And at the last minute, David got Toby to do a commentary for it. So he wasn't in the documentary, but we got him on the so I at least felt like, okay, he's represented on the disc.
No.
But it was just like, Toby doesn't get out of bed for anything less than 10 grand. It's like, well, then Toby's going to be sleeping a lot because I don't have $10,000. And none of that was Toby. None of that was him at all. Because I talked to him later about it. So it's like, oh, I had no idea. I say, I'm sorry. It's like, it's not your fault. You know, it's just like, which again goes to that point where it's like sometimes the people in between can fuck things up and really present to you an image that is not representative of how the person in question really feels about it.
What's interesting is some people are camera shy. I mean, as an example, I'll use these 3 movies as an example. The Untold Stories documentary on the DVD release and Blu-ray release of the original Evil Dead. So they interview Brian Tappert and actors and crew. They don't even interview Bruce,
right,
and they don't interview Raimi. But then there's a commentary on there that has all those guys.
Oh yeah. No,
same thing with Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness. There's a commentary that has Raimi, but not in the documentary.
Well, I did Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness, and 2 of the things I'm very, especially Evil Dead 2, couldn't be prouder of that documentary. And I produced Crime Wave and Darkman and Thou Shalt Not Kill Except and Intruder. So I've done Raimi stuff all over the place. And I've interviewed everybody I could possibly get my hands on. I've never met Sam Raimi. I've never met him, never spoken to him. He just does not really like doing interviews. And so he doesn't do
Except when the studio makes him do it for studio movies.
Well, yeah, that's one thing, yeah. But I mean, hey, he'll talk about Spider-Man or Doctor Strange, sure. But, he doesn't go back to look at his work very often. He'll do a commentary every now and then. But he doesn't like doing interviews on camera from what I understand. And it sucks because, I mean, God, you think I didn't want him on those documents? Of course I did. And, I've admired that guy for years, but he just doesn't. And I can respect that. If he really doesn't like doing it, that's fine. And it's not like he shows up everywhere else. He just doesn't do my stuff,
Right.
So it's like, but yeah, no, I've never, You would think at least I would have met the man. I actually had a chance to meet him at Texas Frightmare a few years ago. He was a guest there, and I was sitting in the lobby. He walked right by the table I was sitting at and stopped for a few minutes. And I'm like, I could introduce myself, tell him who I am, and I'm like, nah, I don't want to go to say, hi, I'm the guy whose work you've been avoiding for the last 10 years. We've never met, and I live right down the street from where you grew up. Thanks. And I didn't want to come off as bitter or anything, because it's, he doesn't owe me anything, but at the same time, it's just like, hi, I've documented your work, ad infinitum, and we've never met. How you doing? So I didn't want to do that. But Bruce has always been so great, and Bruce is so good at telling so many stories anyway. He kind of makes up for the fact that you don't have Sam.
Well, the fact that you've had a chance to watch the rise of a filmmaker's career and chronicle all those filmmakers you've done all the special editions and curated their work, and they did it their way.
Mm-hmm.
Carpenter did it his way. And I mean, every movie has a thing where they had to make a compromise or two, but
oh sure, that's the
those are singular visions. Carpenter, Hooper, Romero, Craven, and in listening to you tell your story, it's clear that you have a voice as well. And even though these documentaries are nonfiction, they're still films. They're still stories.
Oh, very much. I put a lot of my creative soul into these things.
So
absolutely, yes.
So your voice is in the work. It's in the DNA.
I would agree.
I think that as a storyteller, you have a strong voice, and so when you go ahead and you do your own film, I think that the strong voice is going to translate. And
I'm hoping so. I'm hoping that that's what happens. Yeah, I'd like to think that I've absorbed through osmosis a lot of the lessons and things that other people have gone through. And I've noticed the techniques and the thing, and sometimes you learn from what people say were their mistakes. It's like, oh, okay. And then I mean, at the end of the day, when I finally do make my first movie, I'm going to fall down a bunch of times. It's inevitable. It happens to everybody. But I'm hoping that the last, 17 years or so, or whatever the hell it's been, 18 years, I guess. I've picked up a few things along the way. Because I wouldn't trade any. Here's the thing: I wouldn't trade any of this time away for anything. Would I have loved to have made films in my 20s and 30s, and coming up soon my 40s? Absolutely, but I did. I did get to do that, and I made friendships and had experiences I wouldn't trade away for all the money in the world. So it's like, all right. So I didn't get to do that then, but I got to do this instead. Great, life is. When you get to look back and realize all the people that you got to meet and the things you got to do and the things you got to, I've been able to do what I love for a living since 2005. I've been my own boss since then. That's, a lot of people don't get to do that. And that's, I'm not saying that it hasn't been, slim pickings on here around in terms of the bank account, and I had a lot of help. But Lord knows I did not do this by myself. People like Anya and Heather and people like Jim Coons, who shoots all my interviews out in California, and countless other people and editors, and I've relied on, and other producers. No one's a one-man shop. I've had wonderful friends and people who've opened doors for me. You don't do it all yourself, but I've made it this far somehow. So we'll see what the next step is. God only knows. Then again, I could be hit by a flying toilet tomorrow, so who knows? No, like I said, no one's guaranteed tomorrow, so we'll just have to see what happens. But this is going to be an interesting year. I can say with pretty firm authority this is going to be a very interesting year. And it would be interesting if we were to talk again at this time next year. I have a feeling that there will be a lot of different stories to tell.
Oh, definitely. It sounds like it. I'm looking forward to seeing the documentary and everything else that you have lined up. There's lots of companies that when you put the logo in front of something, you don't know what it's going to be about, but you know that you're in for something special. I always know that when it says Red Shirt Pictures, that I know there's going to be something special because there's a voice behind the work.
Well, I appreciate that, and that is kind of in a way what my goal has been. Because I remember that at Anchor Bay. I can't tell you how many people would tell us, I never heard of this movie before, but I saw that boat on the spine and I gave it a shot. And it's like, that's brand loyalty. That's, it's like they trust us.
That's right.
Enough. And so with Red Shirt, when I hear that, and I do hear that every now and then, oh, the Red Shirt, it's like a mark of quality that I really appreciate. And it humbles me. It's like, oh, if you think you took a chance on something or had optimism about something based solely upon that name, I guess I'm doing something right. And that makes me feel great. Because you don't get a lot of feedback sometimes. I mean, you do from the fans, certainly. But, it's not, you don't get into this business for the accolades and the awards. You do it because you love what you're doing, and you just want to help tell these stories, and you have a passion for it. And
well, you don't do it for the accolades, but you have gotten some of those.
I've had a few. I mean, yeah, a couple rondos here and there.
Yeah. So
So no, I'm again, I'm not saying I don't like that sort of thing. It's very, very nice when it happens, but at the same time, that can't be your only reason for doing anything. Or let me put it this way: I've never styled or done a documentary. It was like, oh, this is going to win me a rondo. It's like that doesn't work that way.
I've heard people say that if you're trying to do something that's going to make you famous, you'll fail.
Yeah.
But if you try to put your heart into it and just do your best, then people will see the value in it.
You just do it. You follow your heart and your passion, and do the best you can, and you put it out there. And what happens after that is so out of your control anyway. It's laughable that you think you could make something happen like an award, because you don't know how something's going to be received. Yeah. Are people going to see it? How are they going to view it? What's the culture like at the time it comes out? Is it on a release that gets a wide distribution or not? I mean, there's so many X factors that it's ridiculous to think, all right, this is designed to win me such and such attention and get me. What a waste of time. What a waste of time. All I do is every time I need to be able to, after the project's over, I need to be able to say and look at it and go, I'm proud of that. I'm happy with that. Yeah, I would have liked her or him there or this or that or there. You always have a little bit of wish it coulda, woulda, shoulda. You always have that. But at the end of the day, it's like I'm at peace with that. I think I did my job. And if you can say that, that's more than you can say about pretty much anything else. So that's, yay for me at the end of the day. And these things come so fast and furious. Like in preparation for this interview, I was looking back at my website on all the projects I've done on my website, and I'm looking at these things going, when the hell did I do that? It's like there's one whole year where it's like, I did when did I, who did I, where did I don't even know. It's like, because some of these years it was like a factory line just going out the door, and you just don't have time to appreciate it till years later. And someone will mention, oh, I love that documentary you did on House 2. Right. When was that? Who was in that? It's like, so it's and that's a privilege to be able to say that, because, I haven't had to wait for the phone to ring in a long time. And that's it. The work begets the work. Yeah. And I've forged some really wonderful relationships. And again, talent brings you pretty far, but you need luck. And you need people who are, like I said, are willing to open a door for you that they could have either kept shut or walked through themselves, or let someone else walk through. So it's such a crapshoot, man. It really is. But so far, so good.
I want to thank you for giving us your time and spending, because everybody takes for granted they buy physical media and they just see the special features on it and they don't know what goes into making it. And we're looking at one of the people that makes it, and you've helped us peek behind the curtain and learn about what it takes to make the sausage.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. I mean, sometimes it's there's a lot of hard work that goes from a lot of different people. And, I understand, and it's not, everybody doesn't have to know all that stuff or that information, but, some people don't give a damn about extras on Blu-rays. They just care about the movie itself. I understand that. But for those of you who do care out there, and for the people who've taken the time to, every now and then I'll get an email from someone just out of the blue saying, I just saw this, saw your name on, just wanted to tell you how good I thought it was, or thanks for doing this. And that means the world to me, because it's like, you didn't have to go out of your way to. Most people, if they like something, they'll just keep it to themselves or just tell a friend or something like that. It's only when they hate something that they really get passionate about saying something about it.
Yeah.
So it's always very nice to be appreciated. It's not why you do it,
Yeah.
but boy, I tell you, it helps you get through some of the times where you're just like, oh God, if I have to see one, I don't want to walk, I don't want to look at these movies anymore. I don't want to do that. Sometimes you get worn out, and every now and then something really wonderful will happen and remind you, oh, okay, what I am doing is worthwhile. Certainly, yes. Sometimes you just need a little reminder.
Well, I want to remind you that you've done an amazing job in your career, and you have a loyal fan base.
I apparently seem to, which is very, very nice. It may not be a big one, but who gives a shit? The people who like my work are very supportive, and they keep me going. So that means, it really does mean the world to me. And if I haven't gotten that across in the past, because I don't like talking about myself like I have a fan base and I have all these things. Like I'm not the type of person to go out there and toot my own horn too much. I think I'm good at what I do, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know. I don't do that a lot, but it is always nice to hear, hey, good job. You never get tired of hearing that, so thank you for that. I really do appreciate that.
Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Slipcase Felsher. And this has been TTFT and signing off. Thank you, Michael, for your time.
Now, how much am I getting paid for this interview?
Lots of hugs and love from your fans.
Well, that's more than I thought I was getting. So that's great.
I know you can write that and take that to the bank, and that'll
it'll go in the bank in my heart. So
it's sweat equity kind of thing,
Exactly. Yes, that's exactly what it is. Yes.
Thank you so much for your time, Michael.
Of course.
Have a wonderful evening.
You too, man.